Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight in 7 creepiest graves ever discovered across the U.S., we return to the quiet edges of the world, where the hum of the living fades, and only the wind moves through the graves. These are the stories buried in stone and soil, tombs that whisper, monuments that bleed history, and resting places that refuse to rest. Every account you're about to hear is real, taken from those who've stood before these graves and felt the chill of something watching from below. My goal this month is to reach 4,000 subscribers. Almost 90% of viewers wander in, listen, and vanish into the dark without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Join the darkness. Subscribe now. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what hour of the night it is for you, and if there's a grave or cemetery in your town that truly unsettles you. Type its name below. Because when the world sleeps, and the soil settles, some things beneath it do not rest. Kill the lights, silence the world, take a slow breath, and let us begin. I don't really know how to start this without sounding dramatic, so I'll just tell it the way it happened. The way I told the city risk assessor and the way I tried to tell my wife before I realized it made her look at our bathroom sink like it might blink. I'm a night supervisor for a utility contractor in Washington, D.C. If you've ever cursed orange cones and flashing arrow boards at 2 in the morning, there's a decent chance you were cursing at me. We do water main replacements, storm drain rehabs, trenchless stuff. It's not glamorous, but it pays the mortgage and it used to let me sleep. Used to. This all started on a Tuesday in late September, on a narrow block between 2 row houses in Shaw where the street still remembers horse hooves. The asphalt there is like a palimpsest. Layers on layers, patched and repatched, the history of the neighborhood poured and rolled in tar. Our crew set up to trench across the road, drop a new 8-inch ductile iron line, tie it to the valve box by the corner, and be out by sunrise. I had a small crew, Luis, my best operator, Deb, foreman on paper, actual boss in reality, and 2 laborers, John and Cece. We had a flagger at the end of the block and a Metrobus driver complaining about our timing. It was all the usual ballet. The city inspector, a guy named Price who always smelled like cinnamon gum, signed off on our traffic plan and disappeared into his Jeep to listen to talk radio. We started the first pass with the trencher and the asphalt cutter, clean edges, no drama. The old water line had been mapped as transit, brittle asbestos cement pipe from the 1940s, so we were taking it slow. We vacuumed around anything sensitive. The GPR scan had shown some voids, welcome to DC, but no surprises. That's what the map said, but maps lie. I remember the exact sound when the bucket hit it. Luis feathered the controls and the excavator's teeth scraped something that rang like a church bell underwater. Not rock, not concrete, a slow, heavy metallic echo like if iron had lungs. We all heard it. It rolled down the trench and up through the steel plates stacked on the sidewalk, turning the night into a tuning fork. Deb held up a hand. Luis froze. John killed the saw. In the sudden quiet, the air felt pressurized like the storm you smell before it hits. What is that? Cece asked. Luis said, old trolley rail? But we all knew it wasn't that. It sounded hollow and sealed. And big. We vacuumed around it with the vac truck. Deb had me call Price back to the trench and he came, chewing that gum like it owed him money. We scraped and brushed until a curved surface revealed itself, slick with wet clay. Iron with a seam running lengthwise and rivets the size of silver dollars. It was about 6 feet long, maybe 3 feet wide, not at an angle like a pipe, laid flat. The excavator's first strike had kissed one edge and left a white scratch. Price leaned in and clicked his pen like he could take notes by stabbing the air with it. Seal it and call it in, he said. Seal it how? Deb said. It's a trench. Price looked at me. Tarps, sandbags, wrap the fence. No one touches this till the morning. Could be historic. Could be hazmat, could be anything. What is it? John asked. Price shrugged, but his face had turned a shade lighter. Iron coffin, he said. 19th century. The city finds one every so often under the old streets. They use them during the epidemics. Don't mess with it. Deb and I stared at each other. I'd heard of those cases in training slides. They showed a blurry photo of a coffin shaped like a human, sealed with a window sometimes used to move bodies without the smell. It was a factoid, like the ones tour guides say when they don't want to get into politics. We're in the middle of a water swap, Deb said. What's the protocol? Call the Office of Historic Preservation, Price said, and the medical examiner, and maybe the Department of Health. And definitely stop digging. So we did. We wrapped the fencing in black mesh and tarped the trench. We coned the block off like a crime scene. Over the next hour, curious neighbors pressed faces to their windows, and a guy walking his dog stopped to tell us his grandfather used to talk about iron coffins keeping sickness from getting out. From getting out, he said, like it was normal to word it that way. He wished us a good night and kept walking. Around 2:30 a.m., when the neighborhood finally went quiet and Deb had gone to argue with dispatch about scheduling, and Price had retreated to make calls that never rang through at that hour, I walked the trench alone, checking the shoring, the tarps, the shims under the plates. It's my ritual. Keeps accidents from happening. Night crews get sloppy in the last third of the shift. I try not to let mine. When I stepped onto the gravel near the trench, I heard it. Faint at first. A child's humming. High and soft. The kind of tune kids make up when they line up crayons by color. It was coming from the trench. I thought it was the radio. I thought it was someone's phone. I thought it was a neighbor's TV. I thought a lot of things all at once because the alternative was too strange. Luis, I called, you left something playing? He looked up from the backhoe where he was wiping grease. No music, man. Cece lifted the tarp and crouched by the edge. John held a flashlight. The humming stopped. Then something tapped, 3 soft knuckles on iron. Tap, tap, tap. Cece looked at me. Tell me that's groundwater, she said. It's probably settling, I said, stringing together words that meant nothing. We stood there for too long, heads bent over a tarped hole in a sleeping city, listening to a sound no one prepares you for. I told everyone to back off. Safety first. I called Price again, no answer. Then I called my boss, left a voicemail I wish I kept. We found an iron coffin. It's making noises. I sounded drunk to myself. By 4 a.m., the humming had faded. The tapping slowed like a clock winding down. We worked around the site doing everything but what we came to do. Dawn came gray and flat. The city woke up, annoyed that we were still there. A neighbor yelled that we were blocking her Uber. Someone honked at no one. Deb came back with coffee and a face that said she had argued with lunatics on the phone for hours. Historic preservation will be here at 9, she said. Medical examiner maybe by noon. Health department says if it's sealed, it's fine. We're to secure the area and not disturb it. What about water service? I asked. We've got them off overnight. Deb pressed her fingers to her eyes. Temporary bypass. We're not touching that trench until the suits come rubber stamp it. At 9, historic preservation showed up in the form of a woman in her 50s, with a neat bob haircut and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her name was Catherine Price, no relation to our inspector, and she introduced herself as a city historian. She brought an assistant who took photos and a tape measure. When the tarp came off, she inhaled the way some people do at an art museum. Reverent. It's a Fisk style, she said. Mid-19th century. They advertise them as sanitary, airtight. Sometimes there's a glass window at the face. Window, John said like he'd never heard the word. Catherine crouched and traced one gloved finger along the seam. If there is one, it would be here. The seam had a small plate over it bolted on. The bolts were rusted into brown roses. We don't open these, she added. We document, and if appropriate, we remove the whole coffin for analysis. Deb nodded like this was all a normal Tuesday. Timeline, she asked. We'll try today, Catherine said. I'll need a flatbed and a permit. In the meantime, please don't. A tapping came from the coffin. It was so light I thought I imagined it. Catherine froze. Her assistant held her breath. The tapping came again. Tap, tap, tap. The seam shivered as if the iron had taken a breath. Catherine looked at me. For the first time, her smile dropped. It's settling, she said in a voice that tried to be certain. Luis, who is not easily rattled, put his hand on the iron the way people do in churches. After a second, he snatched it back. It's cold, he said, like a freezer. But it's warm out here. Do not touch it again, Catherine said gently, please. Air pressure differences can cause weird sounds, especially if the ground is shifting. Air pressure in a sealed coffin? Deb said. Catherine's assistant, who had been quiet, said, they use these in outbreaks and smallpox, cholera. There were stories that the iron wasn't just to keep smells in. It was to keep a... She stopped when Catherine glared. To keep the coffin from crushing, she finished lamely. Catherine shot me a look that said, "Don't let your crew spook themselves." I tried to gather the crew and talk about hydraulics and soil conditions and heat differentials like I knew what I was saying. Like we weren't all standing on a street humming under its breath. They loaded the coffin by late afternoon, which should have made me feel better. Catherine oversaw everything. They slid slings under it, leashed to a small crane. The iron lifted clean from the ground, dripping clay. For one awful second, I thought I saw a faint oval under that bolted plate, a lighter ring, like the trace of a window. But it was gone when I blinked. They set the coffin on a padded cradle on the flatbed and ratcheted it down. Catherine signed papers on the truck bed. "We'll take it to a city facility," she said. "Climate controlled. We'll note the site and probably rebury after examination." She glanced at the bronze plaque on a nearby house that said 1872. This block used to be part of a potter's field before the city moved burials. "It happens. Where?" I asked. "What facility?" It came out sharper than I meant. She looked at me like I'd asked for her pin. "A secure one," she said. "This isn't public yet. Please don't post about it." She smiled again. "Thank you for being careful." They drove off. Deb rolled her shoulders like she could put the day back into place. "All right," she said. "Let's put a pipe in the ground." We did. The rest of the week was just trenching and fittings and backfill. No more tapping. No more humming. But that night when I was brushing my teeth, the water made a noise I can only call a hum. A high, pure note that made my molars vibrate. I turned the tap off and the note seemed to continue in the pipes for a half second before stopping like someone touching a glass rim. My daughter, Nora, was already in bed. "She's 6. She hummed to herself when she played with her ponies or when she drew. That night she hummed the same 4-note pattern I'd heard at the trench. I stood in her doorway listening to her sleep and told myself kids pick up tunes at school all the time. The next day, Catherine called me. I didn't give her my number. "City paperwork finds you." Her voice sounded different. "Less museum, more basement." "We opened it," she said. "You said you don't." "We didn't open, we examined, and there was a window," she said, like admitting a minor sin. It had been covered by a plate someone added later. That's uncommon. When we removed the plate, the glass was intact. "Okay," I said, although none of this felt okay. "There was a child inside," she said. "A girl. The preservation is remarkable. The face is visible." She paused. "We resealed the window. The coffin is stable." Another pause. "Have you heard anything?" It was such a sideways question that I didn't process it. "Heard anything?" "Any noises?" "Reports from the neighborhood." "It's probably nothing." Please forget I asked. I didn't say that my shower had whistled a new song that morning, or that when I turned the kitchen faucet off, I heard 3 soft taps in the copper like knuckles under the sink. Tap, tap, tap. That night my crew worked in a different quadrant, but around midnight the radio popped like someone whispered into it, and I felt a vibration through the asphalt under my boots that ran up my shin bones and sat behind my eyes. Luis came over and said, "You feel that?" "Like a train a mile away," I said. We stepped to the curb. The fire hydrant on the corner groaned. Not a leak, a sound. It was as if the hydrant was an instrument and someone had learned how to bow it. It rose and fell, a quiet, careful hum that wasn't the water we put through those lines. Under it, almost lost, was a small voice counting. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. "Deb," I said into my radio. "You need to hear this." She walked over. We stood by the hydrant like it was a campfire on a cold night. The hum pulsed through the metal into the curb. Deb squinted at the nozzle caps as if they had lips. "I don't like this," she said softly. A figure stepped from a doorway across the street. He was one of the neighborhood guys. Sleeps rough sometimes, sells single cigarettes to office workers at lunch. He goes by Arthur. He looked less like he'd been drinking than usual, and more like he'd been listening to something we couldn't hear. He walked right up to the hydrant, rested his palm on the bonnet, and closed his eyes the way Luis had at the coffin. He smiled. There was nothing creepy about the smile, not yet. Just peaceful. Then his eyes snapped open and he looked straight at me. "Don't let them open it," he said. "They didn't," I said. "They just..." He shook his head hard enough that something clicked in his neck. "Don't let them. They do, and she comes out different." "Who?" Luis asked, even though we all knew. Arthur leaned on the hydrant like he was listening to a seashell. They kept her in iron because it sings wrong and makes the bad forget the door. You take the iron away and it remembers. Iron. Sings? Deb said, half laughing. Arthur didn't laugh. You never put a knife on a magnet? It hums if you listen right. He looked back at me and his eyes had gotten wet. She misses the dark. She wants the cold. Someone taught her to knock and hum, and now she knows the pipes. Don't let them. He trailed off. The hum died. He looked like he'd lost his balance only because the sound was what held him up. He straightened, nodded to no one, and drifted away like a leaf down a gutter. We didn't sleep much that week. I told myself I had deadlines. I told myself my kid had a cold and that's why she was rattle-breathing at night. I told myself all kinds of things. Catherine called again on Friday. We're reinterring, she said. Tomorrow. Family descendants have been located. There's a small ceremony. You can attend if you'd like to pay respect since you found her. Quietly, no press. Where? I asked. She gave me a cemetery name in Southeast I won't repeat here. At 10, she said. We're closing the window and replacing the plate. And I'm sorry I asked if you heard anything. That was unprofessional. Why did you ask? I said. There was a long pause. Because our building, the ventilation. We heard something, it's resolved. How? By moving her, she said. That's what we do, I went. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that my life still had linear cause and effect. My wife decided to take Nora to a birthday party instead of a funeral. That was smart, it was a small gathering. A pastor, a handful of city people with quiet shoes, a woman in her 70s who had the same sort of face I imagined behind that oval. Soft, serious, the kind that looks better in black and white photos. She wasn't a direct descendant. Catherine explained there's a genealogical society that shows up when the dead have no one else. The iron coffin was already in the grave, on straps ready to be lowered. The plate over the window looked new. The bolts were new too, bright against the old iron. I stood a little apart near a maple tree. The grass was wet. The city noises were far away in that way cemeteries do on purpose. A trick of landscaping and respect. The pastor spoke about the child having a name at one time, even if we didn't know it now, and about dignity and about rest. The straps creaked. The iron went down into the hole with the steady certainty of a key turning. As it disappeared, a breeze came up from nowhere, a cold one that smelled like an old cellar. The hair on my arms lifted. The breeze hummed, just for a second, and the marble headstone next to the open grave buzzed like someone had slapped a tuning fork to it. The pastor stumbled over a word like he'd swallowed a moth. Catherine glanced at me, then at the ground, then at her shoes. Not looking at something is a way of not admitting you saw it. They covered her. That should be the end, right? That's how it always works in stories. We disturbed the past, we did the right thing, we put it back. We learned something about the fragility of history and got on with the business of leaking pipes and traffic cones. 2 nights later, I came home from a shift around 3 a.m. I took a shower. The hot water made the mirror fog up and sang that faint high note again. I turned the tap off. It kept humming on the other side of the wall for a heartbeat longer. I opened the door to let the air out. The hallway was cool. Our house is old, and the returns groan sometimes. When I walked past Nora's room, I heard her humming that same 4-note pattern in her sleep. I rested my hand on the doorframe. I hummed it back too softly for her to hear, just to see if the universe would answer. The return vent down the hall pinged. Not a hum, a tap. Tap, tap, tap. I told myself I was being stupid. I went to the kitchen to pour a glass of water. When I turned the faucet on, the stream splattered weird for a second. It does that when air gets in the line, but then settled. I lifted the glass and the window over the sink rattled softly, the kind of rattle it does when a truck goes by. No truck. The hum came back high enough that it made the hairs in my inner ear stiffen. The faucet vibrated under my fingers. I turned it off. The hum kept going. I put my ear to the cold metal neck like Luis had to the iron. It felt like a small electric current. Under the humming, I heard breath. Not rushing water, breath in, out, slow, practiced, patient. I said hello before I realized I was talking to a sink. The breath stopped. The house creaked the way it does when it's settling. It's an old house. Old houses make noises. It's something every DC resident says like a prayer. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the couch and watched the kitchen doorway like it was a stage. Around 4:30, I heard the faintest little voice say right into the metal, "Cold." It was so quiet I could have been dreaming with my eyes open. I called Deb the next morning. I didn't tell her everything. I asked how she was sleeping. She said she kept waking up when her radiator clicked in a pattern. "It's stupid," she said. "It's just heat cycling." But the pattern is like it's asking. Asking what? I said. She didn't answer. Then she said, "We shouldn't have let them take it. They had to," I said. "You can't leave a coffin in a trench." "Then we shouldn't have hit it," she said. "Then we shouldn't have been born." "Pick one," I called Catherine. She didn't answer. Her assistant did. "She's not available," the assistant said. Her voice sounded tight. We moved the coffin to a vault earlier than planned. The cemetery director thought it was best. "There's nothing to worry about. Has there been anything at your facility?" I asked Dilance. "No," the assistant said, and hung up in a way that meant yes. "I haven't told you about the dream because it's a dream and dreams don't count. Except this one seemed to breathe on me. I dreamt I was in a narrow iron hallway with rivets my thumb fit into perfectly. It wasn't a coffin. It was a corridor. My footsteps made that damp bell sound. The air wasn't air. It was pressure. I walked toward a light that wasn't a light but heat. At the end, there was a plate over a window and I tried to lift it, but my arms were too small. And then a face on the other side moved like wax in a warm room and smiled with blue lips that weren't blue because of death but because of the iron. I woke up with my hands on my chest like I was trapping something in. Nora asked me at breakfast why there was a girl singing in the bathtub. I didn't drop my coffee. I wanted to. I asked, "What did she sing?" "The counting song," she said, and sang it back. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. "She says she likes the cold metal," Nora added like it was a line from a cartoon. "She says it keeps the bad thing quiet." "Daddy, what's a bad thing that likes warm air?" I Googled 300 things. I don't recommend it. I ended up back on that block after a week. There was a punch list item, a meter pit to adjust, some temporary asphalt to cut for a cleaner edge. The neighbors waved like we were a weather pattern they didn't control. The hydrant looked like any hydrant. The trench was sealed, compacted, patched, nothing to see. I stood where the coffin had been. I don't know why. Gravity. Guilt. Arthur was there like he'd grown out of the stoop. He pointed at the curb. "You know not all iron is the same," he said. "Some sings sweet. Some sings like a warning. The old stuff had more song. They put her in that for a reason. You can move a door, but the room still remembers where it was." "The city moved her," I said. "City moves a lot of things," he said, and shrugged like the sky had an opinion about that. "At home, nights have gotten quieter. That's the honest truth. The hum in the pipes is less frequent. When it comes, it stops quickly, like someone remembering their manners. Nora doesn't hum that specific tune anymore. Now she sings a theme from a cartoon about dogs in uniforms. It's a mercy." 2 days ago, though, I was brushing my teeth and the bathroom mirror fogged the way it does. I wiped it with the side of my hand. In the streak I left for one beat, there was a shape the size of a quarter. A clean oval cut in the fog at about eye level if you were shorter. A little window my thumb could have covered. On the other side of that tiny oval, there was nothing. Just my own tired eyes. Before the fog resettled, I heard very softly a tap in the wall. Tap, tap, tap. I tapped back without thinking. That's the part that makes me feel the worst. Not the hearing, the answering. The tap didn't come again. The house settled. The vent breathed normal air. I went to check on Nora. She slept with the covers kicked to her knees the way she always does. The radiator under her window clicked once, twice, 3 times. The sound was so ordinary that I almost laughed. I stood there until the radiator went quiet, and then I stood there a little longer. Here's what I think, and I know this isn't how serious people talk. I think there's a difference between keeping something out and keeping something in. Iron does both. History does both. We're always congratulating ourselves for moving the past into a nicer display case. We forget that some things were put where they were because that's the only place they don't echo. We put her back and that should be the end, but sounds don't die where they start. They walk. If I ever hear that 3-tap pattern in a place that doesn't have pipes, on the hood of my car in a warm parking lot, on the wood of the pew in the church at my cousin's wedding, on the plastic of the swings at the park, I don't know what I'll do. Sometimes I think I'll pretend I didn't hear it. Sometimes I think I'll answer anyway because that's what you do when a kid calls through a door. Catherine sent me an email last night with a scanned 19th century newspaper clipping attached. A notable interment. During a season of sickness, a young girl of good family, buried in a hermetically sealed case of metallic construction to prevent miasma. The article called the design ingenious and sanitary. At the bottom, someone had written, a note in old fountain pen ink, plate to be secured firmly. Do not permit window. She taps at night. I wrote back asking if that note was part of the original clipping or added later. She didn't reply. Maybe she can't, maybe she doesn't want to. We finished the water project and moved to another part of the city where the streets are wider and the trees are newer and the basements don't remember as much. The asphalt still hums if you stand just right. That's true anywhere. If you've ever wondered what's underneath your street, sometimes it's just dirt and rock and old pipe. Sometimes it's a room with no walls because the walls are all around you and the door is something you use every day without thinking. I'm writing this because I needed to tell it somewhere. If this reads like a ghost story, fine. I prefer to think of it as a reminder to be careful with what we unearth and how quickly we make it somebody else's problem. If you work nights and you hear a high, thin sound in the metal around you, maybe don't lean your ear against it. And if you do, and you hear counting, don't count along. And if you ever hear a child humming in your pipes, don't listen for the words. It's not a song for you. It's a way to keep time. It's a way to remember the cold. I'm going to bed. The house is quiet. The radiator hasn't clicked in an hour. The bathroom sink doesn't hum. Everything is fine. Everything is where it should be. But before I turn off the light, my thumb keeps finding a perfect oval on the mirror, and when I lift it, the fog clears in that shape like someone is looking through from the other side. I keep telling myself it's just oil from my skin, and it is. It is, and then very faintly, from somewhere in the walls, softer than breath, I hear 3 taps. Tap, tap, tap. I'm posting this because I don't know what else to do with it. I'm not looking for attention, I just need it out of my head. Written down somewhere other than the Notes app where it keeps vibrating like a live wire. If anyone in Illinois knows Cage Hill Cemetery, you'll probably have your own version of the story. I'm not here to argue with you. I'm here to tell you what happened to me and to my best friend and to one other person whose name I don't want to say because his family might still check Google. This started last fall, right after the first cold weekend. The kind where the leaves are crisp enough to break under your shoes, and every conversation has a little fog to it. I was 26 and back in my hometown for a few months between jobs. My friend Nate bartended nights and slept until noon like it was his religion. I was crashing at my mom's and doing odd jobs for a contractor named Weller to keep busy. We sucked insulation out of attics, hauled cracked pavers, stuff like that. If you've ever had to drag a shop vac hose through cellulose and mouse poop, under a roof when the temperature drops, you know the exact kind of damp bone-tired I was most nights. On Sunday evenings when the bar was slow, Nate and I would drive around and bullshit about the future. It felt like being in high school again. If we passed anywhere that had a story attached, we'd pull over, kill the engine, and let the silence tell us the parts we didn't remember. There's a quarry outside town where a kid drowned in 2003. There's the old motel with the letters burned out so it just says OTL. And there's Cage Hill Cemetery, up off County Road 14, tucked back behind a line of twisted oaks. I knew Cage Hill because my grandma used to bring plastic flowers there for her mother. Little white daisies with wire stems. She'd sing this hymn under her breath while we stuck the wire into the cold ground. I never paid attention to the other graves. Back then, the place was just an obstacle course of stones and those metal flag holders they put out on Memorial Day. You could stub your toe and end up with a tetanus shot. That was my whole thought about cemeteries. This time when we went, Nate said the words cage grave like he was saying scratch off lottery or dumb dare. His coworker Tori had told him about it. She says people go out there and touch it and wake up with like railway tracks down their arms, he said, making a clawing motion. Like they were trying to get out, from inside. I laughed, because that's the kind of thing you laugh at. But I felt this little square of cold settle in my chest. Cage grave? You'll see, he said. It's literally a cage around one grave. Old-timey iron bars, like a big square bird cage over the plot. It was supposed to keep grave robbers out, but the bars are bent, outward. I told him that made no sense, and he agreed cheerfully. That's how our nights went. The stuff that made no sense was the stuff you're supposed to go look at, I guess. We got coffee at the gas station, burnt, so hot it peeled the skin off the roof of your mouth, and headed out. The road to the EO cemetery didn't have streetlights, just a string of mailboxes with reflective tape and 3-point bucks standing motionless in the corn stubble like mannequins. There's no gate at Cage Hill, just this sagging chain over the narrow drive and a little sign, open dawn to dusk. It was past dusk, obviously, and even though we technically weren't doing anything wrong, I still felt that teenager tightening in my throat, like the sheriff's car could materialize behind us at any second. It didn't. We rolled over the chain and parked on the grass. The moon wasn't full, but it was big enough to show the rows. Old stones first, leaning and thin like teeth, and newer ones as you go back, heavy and shiny with family names etched deep. All the flowers were plastic and clicky in the wind. The air smelled like wet iron. If you know that smell, you're already there with me. The cage grave wasn't hard to find. Even if you didn't know what you were looking for, your eyes would snag on it. It's not fancy like a mausoleum. It's exactly what it sounds like. 4 sides of wrought iron bars, roughly shoulder width apart, and a matching top. Like someone made a box to go around the headstone and then forgot to make it pretty. Rust has eaten it into a red-brown so dark it could be black at night. The posts are capped with little acorn finials. The door is a narrow thing with a padlock the size of a plum hanging on it. If the story was about grave robbers, I could picture it, a widow with money buried with her ring, some idiot with a spade and a lantern thinking he could make rent with it. The cage is there, so he can't. Except the bars on the north side were bent in 2 places. Not ripped out of the ground, still anchored in the concrete footing, but bowed out like something inside had pressed until the iron softened. You know how iron doesn't soften. I don't like that, I said, because I couldn't think of anything smarter to say. Nate was already circling, pointing his phone light between the bars. Look, he said, little scratch marks on the inside. He nudged the light. Close, and I saw what looked like shallow grooves along the headstone's base. Not letters, not the carved kind of scratch. The casual kind. Habit scratches. The name on the stone was Lucy Diag. The last name had flaked off with the softer limestone. The dates were 1884, 1909. I did that math the way we all do it, 25, and felt that cold square shift a little. Someone my age. A little older than me when I was reading it. There was an epitaph that had lost its vowels to time. It might have said, beloved daughter. It might have said, beware. The dirt inside the cage was a little lower than the grass outside, like it had settled. Don't touch it, I said. I want to be clear. I'm not the guy in these stories who says let's split up or let's break in. I don't tempt anything, even when I don't believe in it. If there's a sign, I don't cross it. Who said I was going to touch it? Nate said, and then touched it with one knuckle like he was ringing a doorbell. Dude, I said, too loud. The night took the sound and pushed it right back in our faces so it felt like we were in a small room. He grinned, but it was thin. What do you think's going to happen, man? Nothing's going to... He paused because we both heard footsteps behind us. Not leaves rustling, not wind, someone walking. We turned and saw a man at the edge of the lot with a flashlight. He had a hunting vest on and one of those baseball caps with ear flaps folded up. Park's closed, he said, not angry, just like he wasn't in the mood to write a report. Sorry, I said immediately. We were just... Cage, he said, nodding at the iron. I know. Everyone wants to see the cage. He came closer and the light showed a lined face. Not old. 55 maybe. He had that permanent squint people get from years outside. He turned his light toward the bars and held it there like he was checking a fence. You want a story? It's not grave robbers. They started putting cages like this up after the cholera scare. People were afraid of being buried alive. They used to run a bell to the surface from the coffin. If the person woke up down there, they'd tug the string and ring. This one was cruder. I guess iron bars and a lock made the family feel better. Like it was secure, but it isn't. How's it not secure? Nate asked, eyes on the bent bars. The man didn't answer that. He stuck out his hand and we shook. "Jack," he said. "Groundskeeper during the day. Volunteer at night, I guess, when folks need telling to go home." He didn't say it mean. He just let us know the categories we were in. "Did you ever hear anything?" I asked. It felt dumb as soon as I said it. He would have led with that if he had. It's the kind of thing you lead with and then tell the young guys to go back to their car. Jack took a long time. He ran his light along the bottom rail where it cemented into the blocks. "One time last year," he said, "I was raking leaves and heard metal. I thought it was a truck bed slamming shut somewhere, but there was no truck, just me and 2 deer over there." He pointed at the oak trees. "When I came here, the padlock was swinging. The cage had a little rattle on it. Nothing else, you hear that?" He tilted the light like that would angle the sound to us. We held still for so long my eyes started to water and buzz. I didn't hear anything. The cemetery had that winter silence that isn't dead quiet but is full of small noises you could pretend are mice. Then something, maybe just my blood pressure, thumped in my ear. Jack straightened. "Anyway," he said, "that's your story. Time to head out." We agreed. We thanked him. We promised we were leaving. We really did leave. We drove back toward town with the radio low and our mouths full of things we didn't say because once you say them, you have to mean them. At the intersection for my mom's street, Nate said, "You going to tell Casey we went?" "Casey is my cousin. She has a mouth like a wood chipper and she likes to chew up my nerves." "No," I said. "I'm going to tell Tori we touched it," he said, and then as if catching himself, "I touched it, sorry, I didn't mean to say we." "Yeah, don't say we." We laughed. It didn't sound right. He dropped me off and I did the normal things. Kicked my shoes off, pretended to look at my phone, brushed my teeth. In the mirror, the corners of my mouth had that tight look they get when I've been clenching without realizing. I shook my hands out. I told myself I was fine and I mostly believed it. Until I turned off the bathroom light and saw parallel silver lines down my left forearm. 4 of them, not deep, not bleeding, but fresh enough to have that raised look, like cat scratches. I turned the light back on, heart banging. The lines were still there. You could have measured with a ruler the space between them. Regular as a barcode. I touched one and it stung. When had that happened? I rolled my sleeve up higher and there were more faint ones along the tricep. Another on the back of my hand, like someone had dragged nails lightly across me as a warning. That was the worst part. How light they were. Tentative. As if the hand wasn't sure I was real. I took photos under different bathroom lights because a part of me thought it could be the mirror or a reflection. Different angles. Then I sat on the edge of my bed and just listened to my breathing for a while. I didn't sleep right away. When I finally fell asleep, I dreamed that I was locked in a metal trunk and someone was dragging it across a cement floor, pausing now and then to lift it and let it drop. In the morning, I woke up with dirt under my nails. Black, packed in. I didn't buy it. I thought for sure there had to be some boring reason. I had crawled around under a porch Friday to look at rotten joists. Maybe I hadn't cleaned up as well as I thought. I went to the kitchen and scrubbed my hands. My mom looked at me over her mug. "You're making a lot of noise," she said, still half asleep. "Do we have any hydrogen peroxide?" "What did you do?" "Nothing." Scratched my arm on a branch. At work, the sleeves of my hoodie kept catching on the abrasions and reminding me. I texted Nate. "Hey, did you get any scratches?" He didn't answer until lunch. "What?" "No, why?" Then a minute later, LOL. Then, "You freaking?" I didn't answer. It was better that way. If I let him in, he'd bring the whole bar with him. And their jokes are like gum. You step in them and you're stuck all day. That night I fell asleep hard and woke up at 3:14 a.m. with my heart sprinting. The kind of wake-up where you're already in motion and you don't know why. My room felt small and soupy. The window was open half an inch and the chain on the frame was tapping the sill with this slow insect patience. Tap, tap, tap. My phone lit the room blue when I picked it up. There was a text from an unknown number. "I saw you." No punctuation, no emoji. The area code was local. I stared at it until 2 more came through. "Did you hear it?" And then "You don't get to leave." I did the thing everyone does. I toggled back and forth between unknown caller and my contacts as if the phone would spontaneously tell me who it was if I pressed hard enough. I texted back, "Who is this?" It came back undelivered, like the number dried up between messages. When I tried to call, I got that dead high tone like an old modem. The next morning, I told myself this was a prank. Obviously a prank. Probably Nate or Tori using some app to spoof numbers because she's the exact kind of person who would giggle while she typed "I saw you," and then ask me later if I slept okay. I confronted Nate at the bar. He shook his head so fast his cheeks moved. "No, man, I swear. And Tori is not. She'd claim it if it was her, trust me." "Who else did you tell?" "Like 3 people," he said. "But they're not. I mean, I didn't give out your number, Jesus, I didn't press it. Maybe I should have." That night the scratches multiplied. Not deep, not bleeding, just new. My forearms looked like I'd climbed through a blackberry thicket. There were faint lines on my chest too. So fine I'd have missed them if I wasn't already scanning myself like a TSA agent. I bought sleeping pills at the pharmacy and the teenager behind the counter tried not to look at my arms, which made it worse. "Allergies," I said. He nodded like he'd been paid to nod. On the 3rd night I woke up to the sound of metal complaining. Not loud, there's no cinematic clang in real life, but the slow, honest sound of something bent beyond its memory. If you've ever tried to unwarp a bicycle wheel by hand, you know it. It was coming from the hallway outside my bedroom. I sat up and felt the weight of the room shift like a boat. The air had that penny taste. The chain at the window tapped 4 times, stop 4 times, stop 444. I thought about calling my mom down the hall. I didn't, because I didn't want to pull her into it. That felt important. I don't know why. When I stood up, the carpet was colder and a path to the door like something wet had walked there. I put my hand on the knob and I swear it was vibrating just a little, the way a guitar string hums when the note next to it is plucked. When I opened it, the hallway was empty. The nightlight made a shallow gold puddle on the carpet. At the end of the hall, the attic pull string hung dead still. The cold wasn't there anymore. It was inside me. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I waited for morning to turn me back into a regular person. It did not. I called off work and drove back to Cage Hill. It was dumb. I knew it was dumb, but it wasn't optional. The wind had teeth that day. The sign still said dawn to dusk, but the chain across the drive was unhooked, like someone had left in a hurry and forgot to fasten it. I parked skewed like I could get out faster if I didn't nose in. Jack was there. He stood with his hands in his hunting vest and looked like he'd been expecting me. He didn't smile. "You got scratched," he said, not asking. "Yeah. Left arm? Both now." He nodded like that matched some ledger in his head. "Come on." He didn't ask why I was back. He led me to the cage and pointed at the bent bars. I hadn't seen it in daylight before. The bends were smooth arcs, not sharp kinks, and they bowed outward like wings trying to open and failing. "I've measured these," he said. "They move. A 1/4 inch maybe over the summer, then back, like breathing." "That's not how metal works," I said, because it's what Nate would have said. "It is if it's pulled," he said. "It is if there's something that wants you to know it wants." Jack looked past my shoulder. "You didn't take anything, did you?" "No. Even without taking anything, they sometimes take something from you," he said. And then he said nothing for a while, just watched the thin shadow lines the bars made on the dirt inside. "You been hearing tapping?" I swallowed. "Yeah, counting." He said 4. He nodded again. And for a second I hated him because he had the look of someone whose puzzle just matched the box picture. "Cholera deaths," he said. "Quarantines." They'd scratched the inside of coffins and it had come up 4 marks deep because they used 4 nails to hold the lid corners. "That's a story I heard," he sighed. "You can go to the church and ask them to pray. You can burn sage. But this is a place thing. It doesn't care about your house. Then what do I do?" He didn't answer. He took a plastic grocery bag out of his vest and handed it to me. Inside was a little bell, tarnished silver with a cracked handle and a length of twine looped through it. "You sleep with that in your hand," he said. "If you wake up somewhere you don't want to be, ring it. If you don't wake up, maybe someone else will hear it. I'm not," I said and then stopped, because I couldn't make my mouth say the words, "going to be buried alive," without something in me laughing. "I can't fix this for you," he said. "But don't go touching the bars again. Don't go at night. And if you have dreams that you can't get your shoulders through something, you call me." He held up a card with his name and a number that looked like it belonged to a landline. When I left, I didn't feel better. I felt like the air had been labeled. That night I tied the bell to my wrist like a fool. I fell asleep imagining the way an iron lid might scrape against a stone lip. When I woke up, my hands were numb, pins and needles and something heavy pressed down on my chest like a sandbag. For a full second, I couldn't inhale. When I finally did, it came with a noise I never want to hear from my own throat again. A wheeze that was almost a sob. The bell didn't ring. My wrist was red where the twine had tightened. The room stank like damp dirt, like the grassy smell you get when you roll sod back. The chain at the window wasn't tapping anymore. My phone screen was black and wouldn't wake up. I lay there and whispered very softly, "I'm not here, I'm not here, I'm not here," like I could trick whatever else was in the room into looking somewhere else. At 5:06 a.m., the phone sprang to life. It had a voicemail from an unknown number, time-stamped 3:18 a.m. The voicemail was 42 seconds of quiet. At the 37-second mark, there was a sound like fingernails over canvas. Not loud, not violent, persistent. I didn't go back to sleep. At 8, I drove to Nate's apartment. He opened the door and swore, "Dude, you look like you've been sleeping in a ditch." "Maybe," I said. And then because I needed to be the kind of person who could still make jokes, "Don't worry." I brought my own worms, he poured coffee, and I told him everything except the part where I almost couldn't breathe. Because I needed one piece that was still mine. He listened without laughing, which surprised me. Then he did the worst thing he could have done. He said, "Let's go back." "No. Hear me out," he said. "We go back in the day. We bring cutters. We bend the bars back. If the bars are doing something, breathing or whatever, maybe we mess that up. Maybe it has to stop." "You want to break the cemetery," I said. "I want to keep my friend from turning into a scratch map," he said. "Or a guy who talks about breath in the hallway." He looked at my arms. "We'll do it fast." The part of me that makes bad decisions when I haven't slept nodded. We went to the hardware store and bought bolt cutters we could not afford. The guy at the register looked at us like he knew exactly what we were about to do, and then he asked if we wanted a warranty. We said no because the idea of registering the tool felt like writing down proof. At Cage Hill, the drive was empty. The wind was steady enough to make the oaks hiss like they held secrets they wanted to share but couldn't. We carried the cutters between us like a stretcher. When we got to the cage, we both stopped, mid-step. The padlock was on the ground. It had not been cut. It had not been sheared. It lay like a dead beetle, the shackle open. The door stood ajar by an inch you could have measured with your thumbnail. The disturbed line in the dirt under it looked like someone had towed it open from the inside. "Jack?" I said because I wanted a human name in the space. Nate swallowed. "It's just old," he said. It probably rusted through. We could see the shackle clearly. It had not rusted through. It had slid. Locks don't do that by themselves. I picked it up. It was warm, like it had been clenched in someone's palm for a long time before they set it down. Nate grabbed the door and pulled. It opened with a sound like wet breath through teeth. The space inside was exactly the span of two men standing shoulder to shoulder. The headstone cramped the far end. The dirt inside was smooth except for a shallow oval near the base of the stone. If you've ever sat on your knees and shifted your weight, you know what made it. "We're idiots," I said. "We're fixing it," he said. He slid inside before I could stop him. "Hand me the cutters." He leaned them against the bent bars, testing angles. The cage felt smaller with one of us inside. Smaller, and also like the world outside, it had moved an inch further away in every direction. I stood with one foot over the threshold like that would help and said, "This is..." A sound interrupted me. Not wind, not locks. A human swallow. We both looked up. A man stood beyond the oaks, still as a post. For a second I thought it was Jack. It wasn't. He was younger than Jack, maybe 40. He wore a suit that didn't fit, the ends of the sleeves grubby. He was barefoot. His toes were black like he'd walked in soot. "Hey," I said automatically because Midwestern programming runs deep. He didn't answer. He took one step forward and every part of me wanted to flee. He lifted his hand and his fingers were bandaged. Each one white cloth gray with dirt, the wraps thick, like someone had tried to keep him from bending them. "Nate," I said. "What?" "We need to go." Nate didn't look at the man. He was working the cutters, jaw set, more stubborn the more his hands shook. The man took another step and another, each one precise like he was being told where to put his foot. He had the kind of inward look you see on sleepwalkers. When he was 10 feet away, I saw his eyes. They were not blind, but they didn't seem to be seeing us. They were aimed through us, past the cage, somewhere far and low. "Sir?" I said, "Are you all right?" He didn't react like I'd spoken to him. He looked at the door of the cage, the little oval of space between it and the post, and something changed in his face. Not grief, not relief, recognition. He moved toward it faster. "Nate," I said loud. "Now." Nate looked up finally at the exact moment the man reached the door. We both moved. He braced the cutters against the bent bars like a lever, and I grabbed the door to slam it because that felt like the only boundary we could set. The door shut on air. The man stopped with his nose an inch from the bars as if he'd hit glass. He breathed out hard through his nose and fogged the iron. "What the f—" Nate started, and then the man lifted his bandaged hand and began to press his fingertips to the bars slowly. Each one, and I understood in a cold, clear way that he was trying to get them through. The cloth stuck. He made this soft sound, frustrated, almost embarrassed, and then he did something that should have been stupid. He started to unwind the cloth from his fingers. "Don't," I said louder. "Don't do that." He didn't hear us or didn't care. He concentrated on his thumb, then the next finger unfurling. Patient. I got my shoulder into the door and shoved it until the latch clicked, and I picked up the lock with hands that felt like someone else's and snapped it shut. "You good?" I asked Nate, not taking my eyes off the man. He nodded. "Yeah." His voice was higher than usual. "Yeah, let's go." "Let's go." We backed away together, not turning because prey turns. The man's bare feet shifted on the cold grass. He pressed his naked fingers to the bars, and I saw what I didn't want to see. They were too long, not grotesque, just a little too much like they'd been reaching for too long and had taken on that reaching shape. He wrapped them around the verticals and pulled. The bars bowed out a fraction, then back, breathing slow. We didn't run. We walked with all the calm we had left, got in the car, locked the doors. The man didn't follow. He set his forehead against the bars and closed his eyes. When we drove away, he was still there. I slept at Nate's that night because the idea of my own room felt like an invitation. We put the bell between us on the coffee table like a joke we weren't going to make. We kept the TV on. At 2:43 a.m., the apartment upstairs flushed a toilet and both of us jumped like shots had been fired. At 3:14 a.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. The voicemail icon glowed red. I didn't play it. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted one layer between me and it. In the morning, I called Jack. He didn't answer. I left a message that I still can't listen to without feeling like I'm in a smaller room than I am. I said, "There's a man at the cage. He's not right. He doesn't see us." I texted a picture of the cage with the lock back on. Hours later, he texted back, "I know him." Just that. No follow-up. I called again. No answer. That afternoon, my scratches looked less angry. There were no new ones. I told myself it was because the cage was locked. I told myself the boundary mattered. I told myself a lot of things you tell yourself when you need a day to be a day. 2 days later, the local paper ran a tiny article. Body found near Cage Hill. It didn't say cemetery. It said near. No foul play suspected. No details. The name wasn't printed. The photo was some stock shot of a squad car with tape across the road, yellow and meaningless. I didn't sleep. I went to the cemetery in the morning and the chain across the drive was fastened, and there were flowers. Real ones this time. White lilies with pollen that would stain your hands orange in front of a stone that wasn't Lucy's. A simple new name. The man in the suit. You don't need me to tell you that. Jack stood at the back, hat in his hands. His eyes were red. He saw me and nodded like we were co-workers who had seen too much of the same shift. He had been missing 3 days, he said. He was 2 towns over. Wife says he sleepwalked when he was stressed. Not before. Not for years. The cold must have gotten him. He sat right down over there. He pointed to the oaks. They found him with his hands in his lap. Like he was waiting. For what? I asked, but I already knew. For the door, Jack said. I stopped going to the cemetery. You're going to say I should have stopped sooner. And you're right, but this isn't a story where sensible choices are the cure. I moved out of my mom's place into a different town. I changed my number. I threw the bell in a drawer I never open. I still wake up at 3:14 sometimes. Not every night. Less now. On those nights I hold very still and listen. If there's tapping, I count. Sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not. When it is, it's 4 and 4 and 4 until I talk to it in my head and say the truest thing I have. I'm not there. I'm not there. I'm not there. Last week, 2 months after the funeral, I found a little rust-colored mark on the inside of my wrist. A perfect rectangle like the impression from a padlock. the shackle a pale arc. I was carrying a bag of groceries when I saw it. I set the bag down and my hands shook so hard the apples turned the paper greasy with dents. It faded after an hour. It doesn't matter that it faded. What matters is that it was there. And here's the part I hate writing most because it makes me the kind of person who says the thing you hear in stories like this and dismiss as coincidence. 3 nights ago, my neighbor's baby monitor bled into my radio for a second, old wiring in this building, and I heard a bell, clear as a glass marble on tile, 1 ring, then nothing. If you go to Cage Hill, you'll see the cage. You'll see the bars bent outward. People will tell you that's just how iron ages, or that a truck hit it once and no one fixed it right. You'll be tempted to put your fingers on the rust and feel the roughness. Don't. If you already did, take this for what it's worth. The thing isn't dramatic. It's patient. It doesn't need you to believe in it. It needs you to ask yourself in the thinnest part of the night, whether you are inside or outside. Whether the door you closed is a door at all. Whether the scratches on your arms are yours. I'm not going back to check the lock. I don't walk past the drawer with the bell in it when it's dark. I keep the window closed and the chain still. I don't say Lucy's last name out loud even though I think I've guessed it, filling in the worn vowels like a child tracing a grave rubbing. I won't tell you the man's name either. His wife didn't ask for this and neither did he. I will tell you this. When it gets cold, metal changes. It talks. You can put your ear to a rail and hear miles of train coming before you see the light. Sometimes if you're careful, you can step off the tracks in time and feel the wind and heat slide past you and think, I'm fine. It missed me. And sometimes the sound is not a train. Sometimes it's a bell you didn't pull and the wind isn't from something passing. It's from something breathing, slow as rust, behind bars bent outward to open and outward to welcome you, and outward to let whatever's already inside keep reaching. I'm posting this from a throwaway because I still work on road crews in Arizona, and I don't want this tied to my name. If you're local to Flagstaff or Holbrook, you probably saw the overnight lane closures on the old stretch of Route 66 back in late September a couple years ago. The official reason was subsurface stabilization and unexpected voids. That's the phrase they used on the state site. That's not what we found. This happened on the eastbound side of 66, not far from where it parallels I-40 and dips through that dry wash. People think desert roads are simple. Scrape, lay base, roll, pave. But the old alignments are messy. They've been patched 100 times. They float up after monsoon season and sometimes the asphalt is like a scab over something older. I was on a temp contract then, running flag, and when they trusted me, the walk behind saw. The regular crew was there. Our foreman, Dale, who was the kind of guy that carried a coffee thermos even in 100-degree heat. Miguel, a younger operator who could thread a skid steer between survey stakes like he was parking a bicycle. And Tanya, the inspector assigned from the subcontractor who never smiled and always wore a long-sleeve shirt, even in August. State trooper named Harris babysat us whenever we had to close a lane. There were others, truck drivers, flaggers, a couple of county engineers who showed up when they smelled overtime. But those are the names you need. We were supposed to mill out a section that had alligator cracking and a weird soft spot near the shoulder. It felt like stepping on a loaf of bread. You could put your boot down and the whole area would depress and then rise again. Dale said there was probably an old culvert that rotted out or maybe a sinkhole was starting. He told me to set cones for a longer taper and radioed Miguel to bring the cold planer. It was a normal morning. High blue sky, smell of hot tar from the patch we'd done the day before. Those little wind devils that spin up off the shoulder and carry dust across the lane like something alive. We had classic rock on someone's Bluetooth speaker, and the trooper sat in his cruiser with the AC on, watching the world in his rear view. Miguel started milling. We were taking an inch or two off the top to see what we were dealing with. The machine chewed the asphalt into a conveyor and spat black confetti into a dump truck. The soft spot made the planer bounce and Miguel eased off and reset the depth. I was standing a few feet back when I smelled something wrong. Not gas, not dead animal. It was sweet, like birthday candles after you blow them out, with a sour edge. Tanya, I said because she was closest. You smell that? She sniffed, frowned, and shrugged. Could be VOCs. It's old asphalt. Then she went back to watching the depth gauge. Miguel cut a longer strip and the teeth hit something that didn't sound like gravel. It was a hollow, thudding knock like the planer had touched a wooden pallet. He backed off and lifted the drum. Hold up, Dale yelled and waved us in. We gathered around the cut. Under a thin layer of asphalt and aggregate, there was something gray and smooth. Not concrete, not rock either. It looked manufactured, like the side of a tank or a big pipe, but flatter. "What's that?" Miguel said. Dale rubbed his jaw and looked at Tanya. "We've got a structure. Could be a culvert. We'll open it." He had me mark a rectangle on the surface with paint, then told Miguel to mill inside the lines, but shallow. When the planer shaved the next pass, more of the gray appeared. It wasn't a pipe. It was too flat and the corners were too sharp. It looked like the lid of a box. That sweet burned candle smell got stronger. It was the kind of scent you notice in an old church or a craft store at Christmas. I saw Miguel lean back and wrinkle his nose in the cab. Even Dale stepped away, and he never stepped away from anything. Trooper Harris climbed out of his cruiser and sauntered over. "Everything okay?" "Subsurface," Dale said, which is foreman for "don't worry about it." But he was looking at Tanya as he said it, like he wanted her to make it official. She radioed someone, I assume her boss, and used a lot of words like unmapped and non-conforming. When she hung up, she squared her shoulders. "Open it carefully. If it's a void, we fill. If it's a structure, we document." We cut the rectangle as neat as a picture frame and chipped around it with the breaker until we could see edges. The gray was some kind of lid set into compacted soil. Dale probed with a steel rod.
"It hit hollow about a foot in."
He swore under his breath, glanced at Harris, and said, "All right, let's pop it." We looped straps through the eye bolts that were rusted flush with the surface and hooked them to the skid steer. Miguel lifted. The lid rose with a sticky sucking sound, like pulling a tray out of an oven packed with melted sugar. The smell that came up hit me in the sinuses and made my tongue taste wax. Actual wax, the way a cheap candle tastes if you bite it as a kid. Inside the box was a coffin. I've seen coffins before. I've been to funerals. This wasn't polished wood with brass. This was rough, like it was made by a carpenter who didn't care about looks. Pine boards stained dark and sealed around the edges with wax. The lid had been slathered and then smoothed, and it glistened even in the thin shade of the cut. The shape fit the box. It had been set down there and then asphalt laid over it. "Jesus," Miguel said, voice small. "Back up," Harris said, calmer than I felt. He put his hand out like he could keep us from falling in. "No one touches anything." We all stared. I could hear trucks on I-40 a mile off. A hawk somewhere, the planer ticking as it cooled. It was one of those moments where everything goes quiet, because your brain is trying to decide if what you're looking at is real. Tanya was the first one to move. She pulled out her phone, took 3 pictures, and then called again. She got whoever she needed on the line because she stopped using words like non-conforming and started saying coffin and human remains. She didn't say crime scene, but that's what it became. We set more cones. Harris called it in. Dale told the truck to shut off the conveyor and go dump the millings. We stood in the desert heat and watched the wax on that lid soften and go dull. There were bugs in the air, just the normal desert gnats, but I swear to you they hovered over that opening, like the sweet smell was a signal. It took an hour for the county to show up. A white pickup. A guy in a button-down who introduced himself as Lyle from Cultural Resources. And a second vehicle with 2 people in polo shirts that said, Emergency Management. No one from the coroner that I saw. Lyle looked into the pit and swore as if he'd just remembered something he forgot to do. He had a clipboard, which was stupid because the breeze kept lifting his pages. "We need to cover this," he said. Tanya bristled. "We found it in the course of work. It's documented. We can't just..." "We're not disturbing it," Lyle said. "We're protecting it from the elements. It's unique." Harris leaned over the edge. "Unique how?" Lyle licked his lips. There were things moved along this alignment in the 30s and 40s. Bodies relocated from small cemeteries to larger ones when the road was rerouted. Sometimes they used temporary measures. He waved his hand at the wax. "To preserve identification." Miguel blinked at him. "This looks like a Halloween prop." I was thinking the same thing, but I didn't say it until later. When Lyle and the polo shirts did their serious murmuring, Dale pulled me and Miguel back and said low, "We're going to get told to pave over this." "Is that even legal?" I asked. Dale scratched his neck. "Legal's whatever they write down. We're the guys who move the dirt." There was a lot of back and forth that I'm not going to bore you with. They radioed, took more photos, put a cheap plastic pop-up canopy over the hole, and made us stop work for the day. Harris sat with us until shift change. The emergency people thanked us for our cooperation. It had that weird, polite tone that means don't tell anyone. We were back the next morning before sunrise. The canopy was gone. The hole was covered with a slab of fresh concrete that matched the rectangle we had cut. No one told us who poured it. There wasn't even a cold joint. Someone had floated it flush and tooled it clean, Dale swore. Tanya took a picture and then put her phone away like she knew better. Harris, different uniform this time, said, "Looks like the county was efficient." "Efficient," Dale repeated. "We had an order to pave. Overnight repave at state request. No more milling, just lay 2 lifts, tie into the shoulder and finish before morning traffic." That was the job we were given and the job we did. Before we started, we all looked at each other. I don't know what we were trying to say. Maybe we were waiting for one of us to push back. No one did. When the paver rolled forward, the hopper gulping mix and the augers turning, I got assigned to rake the joint. Miguel ran the roller. The sweet candle smell was still there, even through the diesel and the hot asphalt. Not strong, just a ghost you noticed when the wind shifted. We finished the first lift around 10 p.m. The desert gets quiet at that hour. The bar down the road closes. The truckers stick to I-40. The only sound is your crew, your machines, and whatever the land has to say. Around midnight, we started the second lift. That's when I heard it. You're going to say I heard the roller, or the paver, or the wind. I know the difference. I've worked on roads long enough to tell a squeaky idler from a wheel bearing by listening. This wasn't that. It started as a slow, even hiss coming up through the pneumat. Not from the sides. Not from the shoulder. Up. Like breath through fabric. In, out, in, out. It was almost buried in the vibration of the roller, but it had this rhythm that made my hair stand up. I told myself it was heat. Asphalt breathes when it cures. It off-gasses. That's real. But this had pauses. It had these tiny catches like a person trying to breathe quietly. When the roller passed, it got louder. Just for a second. Like a hand was coming up against something and then falling back. "Do you hear that?" I asked, voice low. Miguel pulled the roller up next to me and lifted his ear protection. His face went blank. He nodded once and put the muffs back on. He didn't say a word. Dale pretended not to notice and waved the paver forward. We finished around 2 a.m. We let the mat cool, pulled cones, and left. I drove home with my window down because the cab smelled like wax. I kept thinking about that lid and the way it gleamed. The way the gnats loved it. For a week, nothing. We moved on to a different section. Then the chatter started. It's a small world, road crews and truckers. By the time a story makes it to a diner, it's got fingerprints on it, but the core is the same. Drivers who run that stretch at night said they heard something through their cab floor. Not rattling, not washboard. Breathing. They described it the same way. A slow inhale that matched the rhythm of their tires. A hold, then an exhale that came right as the front axle hit the next seam. They'd kill their radio's coast and it would still be there. One guy said he could feel it vibrate his boots. Another said he heard a laugh. Not full laughter, just the start of one. The breath in before a laugh, that part I didn't believe. Laughing under the asphalt, come on. But one night I had to drive that way alone. After a shift on another project. The sky was black and moonless. My headlights made the lane a tunnel. I knew exactly where the patch was because we all know our work, even weeks later. As I crossed it, my tires hummed. I listened in pause, out I slowed. That's when I noticed something I can't explain. Every time my rear tires rolled off the patched rectangle, the breath exhaled. Not once, every seam. It matched me, I sped up. The breathing sped up. I tapped my brakes. It slowed, but it caught like it was struggling to keep up. I drove over the right edge onto the rumble strip. The breathing went ragged, then found me again as I came back. I told myself it was the tread noise bouncing off the fresh concrete. I told myself anything to keep driving. I didn't want to pull over there in the dark where we had found that box. I kept the wheel straight, forced my eyes forward, and drove until the old gas station lights in the distance gave me a reason to breathe on my own again. Next day, I told Dale. He didn't laugh. He stared at his coffee and then said, "You hear about the concrete?" "What about it?" "Hairline crack already. That shouldn't happen that fast with a slab like that, not with our climate and traffic. Maybe the subgrade moved. Maybe there was air under there, and the weight of the mat settled it. That's the official kind of explanation you give." But when he said it, I pictured a lip parting, a mouth too long under something heavy, finding just enough space to draw air. I asked Tanya later if any of this was in the report. She said there wasn't a report. She hadn't logged the photos. She had been told to forward them to the county. When she tried to follow up, both numbers she had for Lyle went to a general switchboard. She told me this in a whisper, in the shade of the crew trailer, like a kid telling a secret after a funeral. Then she said something that still bothers me. The wax looked fresh. It had been underground for decades at least, if you believe the road alignment. Wax doesn't stay fresh. It cracks, it gets brittle. That lid had been smooth. It had held a seal. It's like someone had been maintaining it from below. I know how that sounds. I know I'm writing this like a campfire story and you're waiting for a jump scare. There isn't one. The scariest part was how normal it all felt to the people in charge. The county poured a slab, we paved, and life continued. The truckers added a new line to their list of things that make you think twice at night. For us, it became one more thing you don't talk about, next to the time we found a loaded pistol in a culvert, and the time lightning struck the roller and Miguel saw his own hair stand up under the hard hat. You do this job long enough and you learn to make piles in your mind. Usable facts, jokes, danger rules, and the stuff that sits in the bottom like sand. I avoided that stretch when I could. When I couldn't, I kept the radio loud. But you can't always drown out something that's not a sound. Sometimes you feel it more than you hear it. The worst was driving it with other vehicles around me, a semi ahead and a pickup behind, and realizing how the breathing shifted as each of us crossed. It's like the thing under there was trying to keep up with everyone, each inhale reaching for whichever set of axles was above it, falling behind, catching another, like a drowning person reaching for hands that keep slipping away. A couple months later, winter came. Not real winter, just our version. Cold nights, a dusting of snow that looks like powdered sugar and melts by noon. The road contracted. The crack in the concrete spread. You wouldn't notice it unless you knew where to look, but I knew. It ran right across the center of the rectangle, straight and clean, like someone scored it from below. We were assigned to seal cracks in January. I volunteered for another segment. Dale side-eyed me and put me where he wanted. I followed orders until the day he sent me with a melter at dusk to run a bead over that very line. I pulled the melter on its little wheels to the spot. The sun was low and the desert was gray. There was no traffic. You could hear your own throat when you swallowed. I knelt to scrape debris out of the crack. My glove touched something soft. Not rubber. Not sealant. A crumb of wax tucked into the edge like caulk. It was the palest color, almost skin. I rolled it between my fingers. It smeared and left a film. I stood up fast and the melter sloshed. I looked around for Miguel, for anyone. No one was close. I don't know why I did what I did next. Maybe I was trying to prove something to myself. Maybe I wanted to be wrong. I bent down, held my breath, and put my ear over the crack. There was nothing. No sound. I held still until my own heartbeat got loud. I was about to stand when I felt a rush of air touch the inside of my ear like a whisper. Warm, human. The kind of breath you feel when someone laughs too, close to your face. I jerked back and the melter's handle hit my knee. Hot sealant splashed, spattering the concrete. A little drip slid toward the crack and then stopped, like it had reached the edge of something that wouldn't take it. I grabbed the broom and covered like nothing weird had happened. Like I was clumsy, that's all. That night I didn't sleep. I kept trying to picture the lid again, the way we'd found it, and I realized something I hadn't noticed then. The shape under the wax had a contour to it. Not just a flat lid. There had been a hump higher on one end. I think it was a face, and I think it wasn't resting. It was lifted like something inside was pressing up. Not desperate. Not panicked, just amused. You know how a laugh looks when someone is trying not to show their teeth? The way the cheeks raise and the mouth pulls tight? That's the shape I remember through the gloss of the wax. A mid-laugh face captured and smoothed over until it was an impression, but still there. The inspector in me knows memory changes things. The part of me that breathes is sure. I tried to talk to Miguel about it again. He shut me down quick. Don't, he said. I hear it sometimes when I try to sleep. The roller going back and forth, the breathing under it. Why don't you tell Dale? I asked. He knows, Miguel said, eyes on the ground. He avoids it too. In the spring, an older trucker stopped by while we were flagging. He had a mustache that looked like it had been with him through 3 marriages, and a denim vest with patches from places that don't exist anymore. He pointed with his chin at the patch. You boys put that down? Dale nodded. That's ours. The trucker spat and said, You know they buried someone under the old 66 when they built the bypass? My uncle used to say you can hear him laughing when you run over his grave. Old stories, Dale said. The trucker shrugged. Every story is old to someone. He got back in his cab and drove off. I told myself it was just folklore filling a gap. Someone, somewhere, had started a rumor to make a boring road interesting. The human brain wants to put a ghost on top of anything sad or hidden. But then why the wax? Why the teeth? I didn't tell you that part yet because I didn't see them myself. Others did. The day we found the box before the county came, one of the drivers, a kid named Roman who hauls plant mix, leaned too far over the edge with his phone and almost dropped it. He swore and then stared down for a long second. When he climbed back, his face was off. He didn't talk for an hour. Later, when we were nursing Gatorades in the shade of the loader, he said, There were teeth. Like a skull? I asked. No, he said. Like a mouth. Like a smile. But wax everywhere else. He shivered, actually shivered in the heat. They were too nice. No chips, I didn't look. I didn't need to. He looked like a guy who saw a shape that didn't belong in a hole in the ground, and he didn't want it living in his head rent-free. You can stop reading here if you want the clean version. The part where we found something covered it and the world kept going. If you want the messy part, the part that follows me around like a change in air pressure, keep going. Last month I drove that way with my sister in the car. She hates the interstate and likes the old road and the neon signs that still work. We were talking about nothing, and my brain was not in the past. We hit the patch and I felt it again, the inhale, the pause, the exhale. My sister stopped mid-sentence. She looked at me. She opened her mouth and then closed it. You heard it, I said. She nodded. What was that? Old road, I said. Weird acoustics, she didn't press. She turned the radio up. We passed the dry wash and the shuttered diner and she said almost to herself, It sounded happy. Then she looked out her window and rubbed her arms like she was cold even though the AC was off. That's what stays with me. Not anger, not pain. The idea that whatever is under there is pleased. I don't know what kind of person you have to be to laugh under a slab and a few inches of mix while tires drum a rhythm on your ceiling. I don't know if this is one body or a thing that grows out of a story told enough times. I don't know who poured the wax or why they used a box built like a prop. I don't know why the county handled it at night and why the crack refuses to hold sealant for more than a week. I just know that when you drive, that stretch eastbound past the wash, and the road hums and your tires fall into that old steady rhythm, there's a moment where something catches the beat with you, and if you turn the radio off and hold your breath, if you listen like you're hoping not to hear anything, you'll feel it. You'll feel the exhale arrive at the exact moment your front tires step over the seam, like a punchline that's been waiting for you since the day the first layer went down. I changed crews this year. I don't work that alignment anymore. When people bring up the overnight repave, I shrug and say I was on vacation. It's easier that way. Every once in a while I catch a whiff of candles on a hot day, and my mind goes there whether I want it to or not. I see the lid in my head, smooth and glossy, with a face pressed up underneath like a kid making a joke against a window. I hear the shallow laughing breath of someone who knows you can't stop and get out. Not there. Not in the dark. Not with 18 wheels behind you and the desert pressing in on both sides. If you're passing through at night and you feel it too, don't be the hero who pulls over. Don't kneel and put your ear to the crack. Don't bring a chisel. Don't write to the county. Don't tell me I should have done more. Keep your speed, eyes forward. Let the rhythm carry you. Let whoever is under there finish their laugh, and if you can help it, don't breathe back. I'm not a cop and I'm not a journalist. I digitize boxes, paper, film, tapes, into neat little folders with dates on them. It's the kind of job you do with headphones on and a thermos next to your keyboard. The kind of job where the most exciting part of your day is when the scanner jams and you get to crack the lid open like a hood and pretend you're a mechanic. I don't chase stories. I don't break them. I'm the boring line between a dusty box and a searchable PDF. That's why I'm writing this like a confession. Not because I think I'm special, but because I kept something I shouldn't have. And I think that shouldn't have is catching up with me. This started last winter when our department took on a federal backlog. Miscellaneous evidentiary media, slated for digitization and cross-indexing. Mundane stuff mostly. Property logs, unclaimed film rolls, cassette interviews from closed cases. Half of it looked like it had been shuffled from building to building since the 70s. Our supervisor, a woman named Carol, who had been in archives since CDs were cutting edge, told us not to expect much. "If you find cash, it's counterfeit," she said. "If you find gold, it's a prop." She smiled and pushed a hand truck toward the processing room. "If you find a tooth, tell me anyway." My team was just 3 of us that week. Me, my friend Luis, and a temp named Abby, who was studying museum science and corrected you gently without making you feel stupid. We split the carts. Luis took anything magnetic, tapes, reels because he liked the deck. Abby handled photos because she treated fingerprints like war crimes. I got paper. Paper is honest. Paper doesn't hum when the building is quiet. The first time I saw the phrase "lead maskman" was stenciled in black marker on the side of a file box, in a space where there was supposed to be a barcode. Underneath, someone had added "recovered files," originally Rio de Janeiro resurfaced in U.S. records. It was written in 2 different hands. The top line was neat. The bottom line looked like it had been added fast, like whoever wrote it was more worried about saying it than how it looked. I'd heard the story loosely, the way you hear about weird facts at a party. 2 men in suits found dead on a hill in Brazil in the 60s, each wearing a lead mask, no obvious cause of death. Something about a note, something about a signal. Luis had a podcast phase and told me things like that while we fed microfiche into the scanner. I figured this box was a copy of the Brazilian case file. Maybe law enforcement training material. It had that vibe. Foreign case, domestic curiosity. A kind of novelty. I popped the lid. Inside was a manila folder, 2 plastic sleeves with film negatives, and a smaller box with a property receipt taped to the top. Same words as the side, "lead maskman," plus a date, March 12, 2019. The receipt listed MISC, metallic personal effects. The line for origin said NM storage unit, forfeiture, New Mexico. "Hey," I said to Luis, who had one earbud dangling and was humming that repetitive beat he plays when he's concentrating. "You remember that case with the lead masks?" He stopped the deck with a finger. "Brazil, men in suits?" "Yeah." He rolled toward me on his chair. "You got something?" I held up the smaller box. He whistled softly. "We doing this now or after lunch?" "Now," Abby said without looking up from her photo stand. "Because if that's evidence, it should be logged, and if it's not logged, then we're all accessories to whatever." "It's logged," I said, tapping the receipt. "We're just making it digital." I cut the packing tape carefully. The way Carol taught us, slice, fold the edges so it doesn't stick to anything else. Place it label up on a waste sheet so you can put it back if you need to. Inside the smaller box were 2 things wrapped in brown paper. They were heavier than they looked. I peeled back a corner and saw dull gray, not steel gray, chalky. The surface made a sound against the paper that I felt more than heard, like rubbing 2 stones together underwater. "Is that lead?" Luis asked. I said it would fit. I unwrapped one completely. It was a mask in the rough shape of a faceplate, the kind you'd see on a welder's visor, except it had no slit for eyes. No slits at all. Just a solid metal plate curved to sit over the eyes and nose, with thin wires at the sides where someone had attached elastic or straps at some point. A residue of something dark along the edges made a faint ring on the brown paper like a shadow. The second one was identical. Abby came over holding her gloved hands away from her shirt the way surgeons do in movies. "Wait," she said quietly. "Are these from Rio?" The property receipt didn't say. It had been filled out by a U.S. Marshal whose signature looked like a heartbeat. Abby lifted the corner of the paper and frowned. "They look newer. The edges aren't oxidized." She glanced at the spines of the manila folder. "Maybe the file explains." The folder was thicker than it looked. It had copies of the original Brazilian reports, typed, translated, stamped, plus photographs, plus a photocopy of the famous note, "Wait for the signal. Protect the mind." There were sticky notes in English attached to several pages, pointing out details like "no radiation found" and LEDs, improbable. It also had a thin stack of emails printed from a .gov account, the newest on top. The headline of the top one read, 2019-03-12, NM forfeiture search, distinctive items, possible link to historical. The body of the email was short. 2 lead masks, nearly identical to the Rio specimens, Found in unit registered under pseudonym. Name on rental, MH. No further identifying info. See attached images. There were thumbnails. They showed a storage unit with the door rolled up and a row of corrugated boxes. A fluorescent light puddled on the concrete. The masks sat on a folded camping chair as if someone had set them there carefully side by side. Louis squinted. So someone in New Mexico had their own set. Or, Abby said, someone made copies. After hearing about the case, why would they keep them in a storage unit under a fake name? I asked. Abby didn't answer. She was reading. Her lips moved as she followed the lines. When she reached the second email, she stopped. Her thumb tapped the margin. What? Louise asked. She didn't look up. There's an addendum. Someone wrote you shouldn't say the names out loud. If you have to reference them, use the initials. Don't say the names together. Louis glanced at me and rolled his eyes. Like Bloody Mary? Abby blew out a tiny breath that wasn't a laugh. It says electronics interfered with the site search. Batteries drained. Phones recorded static. They tested the masks for residue. They found trace lead, obviously, and some kind of... In the margin, it says unknown alloy high attenuation. And the note. What note? She flipped a page and separated a photocopy from a later color print. The color print was of an index card. Someone had written a date on it, the 02-10-66, and then, below, in Portuguese, the words from the famous note. In English, under that neat handwriting, wait for the signal, protect the mind. That's from the Brazil case, Louis said. Keep going, Abby said. The next image showed another card, this time stamped with a New Mexico storage company's logo. In ballpoint, the words, wait for the signal, protect the mind, same handwriting. The date on the top was different. 2/10/19, 53 years later to the day. I felt something in the back of my teeth like a taste. It wasn't strong, not then. Just metallic, like you get when you hold a coin under your tongue as a kid. Because someone told you it tastes like water and you believe them. I rubbed my tongue against my gums and looked up. The fluorescent lights in the ceiling hummed the way they always did. One flickered briefly, the third one over the microfiche station, but it always did that when the heater kicked on. Louis said their names. I'm not going to write them. If you've heard the story, you know them. He said them like a punchline, grinning at me over the folder. The lead masked men, he said, and then he said their names separately, clearly, like a narrator closing a book. The light over the microfiche station went out. Abby turned her head fast. Louise blinked up, still half smiling. The building's hum shifted a little, like something had leaned on a power line. Then the light came back on by itself. Old ballast, he said, and tried to make his grin again. City maintenance, am I right? I had the taste in my mouth again, stronger. Abby stated the obvious. Don't say the names. Her voice sounded small in the room. We scanned the papers, one sheet at a time. I set the masks on the table behind me, far enough that they weren't in my peripheral vision. We worked quieter than usual. It wasn't a pact, just a thing that happened. Every few minutes, the hair on my arms would lift like a draft was moving through, even though the room had no windows and the vent above us was silent. Around 3 o'clock, Carol came in to check our progress. She was carrying a container of cut carrots that she chewed without pausing. How we doing? She asked. Her eyes found the masks immediately. She stopped chewing. Those crossed state lines? New Mexico, Abby said. Storage unit forfeiture in 2019, possibly related to the Brazilian case. Who signed for that? Carol asked. U.S. Marshal, I said, and gave her the receipt. She held it delicately by the edges, then, to my surprise, set the carrots on the counter and put on gloves to touch the brown paper. You all right? Louise asked. You look... I don't know. Carol flexed her hands like her gloves were tight. It's cold in here, she said, which was not true. The archive rooms are kept at 68 degrees and 82% humidity. And after your first month, you stop noticing. Make sure you... She stopped. Her eyes were on the masks. Her face made a little expression like she was trying to remember a word. Twice she opened her mouth and closed it again. Then she nodded once to nobody and said, "Log everything," which was the kind of advice she gave when she didn't have anything practical to add, and left. Abby went back to her photos. Louise put both earbuds in. I finished the last section of emails and got to a stapled packet that didn't match the others. This one wasn't printed on plain office paper. It was an old dot matrix printout, green and white stripes faint from age. Across the top, EM intermittency, field notes. The first line described a test with a handheld radio and a comparator mic. The second line was a single sentence. Lights flicker when you say their names. Okay, I said softly, mostly to the empty air. The packet was a log of experiments someone had done. Not official. There were no signatures, no file numbers. Just a date, April 1971, and a location, Niterói, the hill where the men were found. The notes weren't scientific in the way a journal article is scientific. They were desperate, counting seconds between flickers, counting breaths between clicks on a Geiger counter that never rose above background, listening to static, measuring a metallic taste by how many sips of water it took to wash it away. I was halfway through page 3 when another fluorescent light buzzed, flared, and dimmed to a smear. Luis took out one earbud and glanced up again. Seriously, he said, half to the ceiling. Maintenance has to— Don't, Abby said without looking up. Just don't say anything. He rolled his shoulders. All right. He put the earbud back in and did not press play. I could see the wire hanging against his neck. He was listening to nothing. At 5:30, we packed the box and I locked it in the cage like we do with any item that has a property receipt. I printed the temporary tag, zip-tied it to the handle, and scanned it into the system as in progress. Carol gave us that little nod she does when we haven't broken anything and told us to go home. I carried the taste with me. You know the taste I mean. If you've ever had a filling come loose and you can feel the edge with your tongue, that metallic ghost. If you've ever bitten your lip and tasted a hint of cold, it's not dramatic. You don't spit. It just sits there making you aware of your mouth. My apartment is in an old brick building over a deli. The deli closes at 6, so my hallway smells like cold fry oil and bread. The light in the stairwell is on a timer. You press the button, it hums awake, and you have maybe 2 minutes to get to the 3rd floor before it clicks off again. I pressed the button and it hummed. It was bright for the first flight. On the second, it dimmed and brightened like someone was sliding a dimmer switch you couldn't see. At the landing, I said without meaning to, their names together, like checking a cut to see if it still hurts. The bulb stuttered hard so fast it became its own high-pitched sound. The metallic taste spiked. I pressed the button again. The light steadied. I laughed at myself, a brittle sound, the kind you make when you're alone and feeling stupid. Inside my apartment, my microwave clock was flashing 12 ew. That happens after outages and there hadn't been one. I fixed it. I went to the sink and drank a glass of water. The taste didn't go away, I didn't sleep well. There was a noise in the building's wiring like a low insect. Around 2 a.m., the lights in the alley strobed, threw the shadow of the fire escape across my wall in slices and then stopped. My phone buzzed. Luis at 2:11 a.m. You awake? Electricity being weird? I texted back. Yeah. Then, don't say their names. He sent an eye roll emoji and after a minute, nah, for real. My smoke detector chirped like the battery died, then stopped. Then my speakers popped. I stared at the messages and didn't write anything because I was suddenly very aware of the silence in the room. It was louder than the insect hum had been. Then, like someone turning a coin inside my cheek, the taste intensified. I swallowed. It didn't help. In the morning, I told myself I'd leave the box for someone else. Let Carol assign it to an intern. I'd rack the PDFs, check the metadata, and pretend I hadn't felt anything at all. Then I walked into the archive room and pulled the box out of the cage without thinking about it. Abby wasn't there yet. Luis was early, which meant he hadn't slept either. He had a paper cup of coffee that smelled burned. He raised his eyebrows. We're really doing this. We're finishing the file, I said. He nodded and flipped the tape deck on just to see the little LEDs come up. They came up one by one instead of together, like a marquee with missing bulbs. He turned it off and slid the deck aside. No sound today. Abby walked in at 9 with a tote bag and a look that told me she had read until 3 in the morning and had questions for a dead person who would never answer. She put her bag down, put on gloves, and said, I found something. She reached into the tote and pulled out a thin binder with a plastic cover, the kind you get at office supply stores, with a title page that read, Interagency Communications, Lead Mask, 1971-1975 excerpts. She tapped the corner. Public copy. Interlibrary loan. Someone posted the call number on a forum. Louise gave her a look. That seems not great ethically. It's a public copy, she said. And anyway, it's here now. We can scan it and return it the way you scan your passport at the airport. Clean. No harm done. She lowered her voice. Please just look at this page. The excerpt was an internal memo from 1974. It said in that bland government tone that certain case elements had interference incident correlations and recommended that field agents avoid uttering specific proper nouns associated with the incident within proximity of radios, recording devices, or ungrounded electrical circuits. Then, hand-scrawled in the margin, a note, also the lab. The lab lights buzzed when we said the names. The receptionist got a nosebleed. Abby flipped the page and pointed at a paragraph that someone had underlined twice. It was about masks. Not lead exactly. Lead-lined. Something about attenuating waves translated from Portuguese. Something about protecting the mind as a literal suggestion, not a metaphor. Like a Faraday cage, Louise said. On your face, I said. Abby nodded, except not exactly. Whoever did the experiments, he talks about intermittency. She struggled with the word like it didn't want to be said. He couldn't get consistent results. Like the signal wasn't steady. Like it came in pulses or it only happened when certain conditions lined up. Louise said, like when someone said their names. The light over us buzzed quietly for 3 seconds and went still. We scanned the excerpts. I took the masks out again. This time, I put them on the copy stand and photographed them with the high-res camera so we could zoom in later. Abby angled a desk lamp so the surface texture would show. The metal took the light like skin takes lotion. Dull and soft and not reflective in a way that made it feel like it wasn't metal at all. When I picked one up to set it back down, the elastic old brittle snapped under my fingers. It made a dry, resigned sound, like something that had been waiting for that very moment since it was made. I apologized out loud without thinking about it. Louise laughed a little. You say sorry to objects now? Sometimes, I said. Say sorry to the power company, he said and gestured at the lights. Tell them to get off their... He didn't finish because the lights went out. All of them, at once. The emergency exit sign glowed weakly over the door. The deck gave a soft dying whir. In the dark, our breathing sounded like someone else's in the room. Breaker? Abby asked, voice low. Maybe the whole block, Louise said. He took out his phone. The screen didn't come on. Huh, he said, and pressed the button the way you press the button on the crosswalk when there are no cars. I took my phone out too. Black. Not dead, just off. When I pressed the power button, it was like pressing the back of my own tooth. The metallic taste bloomed. Abby said, Don't say their names automatically like you tell someone not to sneeze. I'm not, Louise said. I didn't, I was just... The emergency light flickered like it had blinked. When it came back for one fraction of a second, I saw something on the surface of the mask I was holding. Not a reflection. More like the texture of the metal had shifted the way a field of wheat shifts when wind goes through it. A ripple that suggested depth. Then the light steadied and it was dull again, a dead gray that swallowed the glow. I'm putting these away, I said. Seconded, Abby said. We boxed everything. The lights came back on when the box lid snapped into place. It was theatrical enough that I felt stupid standing there with my hand still on the cardboard like a magician who had just done a trick. Louise tried his phone again. It woke up. He held it up like a talisman. See? He said, and then, I'm going to step outside and call the utility, just to see if there was anything. He looked at us, waited for one of us to say, don't go alone, and when we didn't, he gave a little shrug and left. Abby and I sat for a minute in the suddenly too bright room. She took off her gloves and rubbed a line on her wrist where the elastic had pressed. Do you ever think about how some stories don't care if you believe them? She asked. All the time, I said. Most of what we digitize is like that. It's like the story is just waiting for the right person to read it and tilt a little. She nodded. Maybe don't tilt. Louise came back in 5 minutes later. They said there were no outages, he said, and that I should check my panel. He held up a donut he'd apparently bought from the lobby vending machine because that's what Louise does when things are weird. He eats. Want some? No, Abby and I said at the same time, which made him grin. At lunch, I couldn't make myself leave the room. I ate a granola bar at the desk and watched the box like it might move. Carol stopped by, saw the way we were ignoring the cafeteria's siren call and said, "You three need some air." Then she saw the box. "After you lock that up again." We did. And that should have been it. That should have been where this story stops. Just three people who took their jobs too seriously and spooked themselves for a day. But stories don't line up neatly just because you're done with them. That night, my hallway light didn't come on at all. I felt my way up by the handrail. On the second floor, I heard my downstairs neighbor's radio crackle, cut to static, and then come back mid-song. When I reached my door, the metallic taste was so strong it felt like a coin was actually on my tongue. I spit into the sink because I couldn't help it. The water ran pink for a second. That had to be placebo. I turned on every light in the apartment and sat in a chair in the kitchen, like that would prove I was in charge. My phone buzzed. "Abby, do you feel it at home too?" I called her, which I almost never do. "Yes," I said. "Don't say they're not..." "Mez," she finished. "I know. I'm not..." Her voice was thin, like she was walking while she talked. I went to my parents to pick up a space heater, and their porch light went crazy when I got there. My dad made a joke about ghosts. I laughed. Then the TV popped. She was quiet for a second. I made sure I hadn't said anything. "It still happened. Luis?" I asked. "He said his building had an electrician come by for a different unit, but that could be coincidence." She made a sound that might have been a laugh. "We're librarians in a thunderstorm, that's what this is. Just small-town noise that feels big because we're inside it." "Right," I said. "Small-town noise." The lights in my apartment dimmed, stayed there for a long breath, and brightened. I added, "If anything gets weird, go to your bathroom and sit in the tub." Something about pipes. Grounding. "That's for tornadoes," she said. "Maybe it's universal." We hung up after promising to text in the morning. I put my phone face down on the table so the glow wouldn't bother me. 10 minutes later, it vibrated so hard it shuffled itself a half-inch. The screen was full of glitching texts, random symbols, lines of equal signs, bent little letters like a ransom note typed by an anxious person. Then it went blank and came back to the lock screen. At midnight, my smoke detector chirped twice and then stopped. I stood under it with the broom to hit the reset button and didn't, because the broom bristles were trembling like someone had passed a hand through a static field. I slept a little. I dreamed I was holding the mask again, and it was warm, the way a seat is warm when someone has just stood up. In the morning, the taste was less. The lights behaved. The day felt like a day again. I told myself it had all been a suggestion soaked into my head by the file, and that my senses had obeyed like eager dogs. I went to work. There was an envelope on my desk, no stamp. Just my name, written in sharp block letters that looked male and impatient. Inside was a printout, one page from a public records request someone had tried to make and failed. It was redacted to the bone. You could see the requester's opening line. "Pursuant to the Freedom of Information Act, I am requesting any and all documents related to items recovered in a storage unit in New Mexico in March 2019, specifically any items consistent with lead masks." Then a wall of black. At the bottom, a note from the agency. No responsive documents, which was untrue because I had them in a box that was 10 feet away from my chair. I went to Carol's office with the page in my hand. She wasn't there. Luis leaned over the back of my chair when I came back and said, "Anonymous pen pal?" I showed him the page. He read it, then read it again. "Who put this here?" he asked. "I don't know." Abby arrived with a coffee and saw our faces and put the coffee down untouched. "What happened?" I showed her the envelope. She stared at it and then said very softly, like to herself, "Protect the mind." I didn't want to, but I said, "Don't say..." "I know," she said, brittle. "I'm not." The day was quiet. We scanned court transcripts about things that had nothing to do with masks or signals. I made a spreadsheet. Luis fixed a label printer by hitting it exactly once. By 4 o'clock, I had convinced myself the envelope was Carol's, some bureaucratic courtesy she hadn't announced. A way of letting us know that sometimes the words "no responsive documents" were a ritual more than a truth. At 5, I went into the cage to put something back and found the lead mask box open. The zip tie was intact, because I put it through the handle, not around the lid. The lid had been lifted from the other side, pried gently so the cardboard bent but didn't tear. Inside, the brown paper around the masks was folded back. The masks were side by side, not stacked like I had left them. There was a note on top of the folder. It was an index card. In ballpoint, wait for the signal. Protect the mind, no date. I felt the metallic taste so hard it made my mouth water. I closed the lid and stepped back out of the cage into the bright room like a person leaving a hospital room carefully so as not to catch anything. Louise said something. I didn't hear it. Abby saw my face and stood up. Someone opened the box, I said. We all looked at Carol's office. It was dark. We looked at the door to the hallway. It hadn't opened. We looked at the ceiling like the answer would be printed there and say, "It was me, you ridiculous people, I was checking something." There was nothing. "We're returning it," Abby said. "We're done. We'll finish the scans and send it to whatever vault it came from." "Yeah," Luis said, rubbing his neck. "Yeah." On my way home, it started to rain, soft, cold, like the sky was pushing a sheet across the city. On the second-floor landing, the stairwell light flickered, and I didn't press the button again. I stood in the dimness and said, "I'm not saying your names." The metallic taste lifted for one clean second, and then it came back. 2 days later, Luis called in sick with a headache that he said sounded like a fluorescent light. Abby stopped wearing her smartwatch because it buzzed her out of a dead sleep with blank notifications. Carol quietly asked us to stop working on the box. "I'm going to reassign that," she said. Her voice was gentle in a way I had never heard before. "Sometimes we shelve things." The box went to another floor. I told myself that was that. I told myself the files would be cataloged under some number that sounded like a keyboard slipped, and that I didn't need to know which number. I told myself this because telling yourself something is how you get through a day without yelling in public. Last Thursday, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. No subject. No greeting. Just a photo embedded. It was a storage unit like the one in New Mexico, but older. The walls darker with age. On the floor, 2 masks. Not on a chair this time. On concrete. In the corner of the photo, you can see a sneaker like the tip of a question mark. Across the bottom, stamped by an old digital camera, a date 02-1066, which is impossible, unless someone wanted me to understand exactly what they were saying. Under the photo, 4 words typed clean. Wait for the signal. I looked up at the ceiling. The kitchen light hummed. I'm posting this here because I need to push it out of my head. It's a superstition, like writing your nightmares down to make them less sticky. I know how it sounds. I know that you can't strap a piece of lead to your face and keep your thoughts safe like a radio in a cookie tin. I know that names aren't switches. I also know this. The air near my microwave makes my arm hair stand up now. The metallic taste has learned how to arrive before a light flickers, the way thunder learns to come after lightning. And last night, when I was brushing my teeth, my bathroom mirror went a little darker at the edges like the room had become deeper without changing shape. The bulb over the sink stuttered once. I heard as clear as if someone had put their mouth near my ear, a short breath that wasn't mine. Then the light steadied and the room was small again. I said the names in my head because apparently I haven't learned anything. The light didn't move. The taste didn't spike. Nothing happened. Then my phone in the other room began to ring. The caller ID said unknown. I let it go to voicemail. It left 1 second of static and then hung up. When I played it again, the static was gone. There was nothing. The timestamp read 0210, which is not a date but felt like one. This afternoon at work, Abby brought me a copy of a photocopy of a translation from the Brazilian file, a line I hadn't registered before. It was from a neighbor who'd seen the men in suits before everything. He said they had been very certain about their appointment, and that they kept checking the sky. The translator wrote the word signal in parentheses like a suggestion. I asked Abby if she believed they were waiting for an actual sound. A tone, a frequency, a thing you could tune to if you had the right radio. She shook her head. I think they were practicing, she said. Like how you practice taking a breath before going under. I haven't touched the mask since the day in the cage, but I keep thinking about the elastic snapping in my hand, how it sounded like a line giving way. I keep thinking about how the metal held the light like skin. I keep thinking about the phrase, protect the mind, and how it makes my scalp feel too tight. If you say their names out loud, the lights might flicker. Or maybe they won't. Maybe they only do that in rooms like ours where everything is a circuit and nothing is grounded. Maybe it's worse to say their names in your head where no one can tell you to stop. I'm not going to say them here. Not because I think it will hurt you, but because I've learned that some names are like keys and some stories are like locks that have been waiting for a long time. You don't put one into the other unless you're very sure you want to see what opens. Just if your hallway light stutters for no reason, if your smoke detector chirps and then changes its mind, if the air tastes like pennies, don't test it. Don't press the button again to see if it does it twice. Don't laugh and make a joke about ghosts. If you find a note that says, "Wait for the signal," protect the mind. Don't put it in your pocket because it's a good story. Don't take it home like I did. Put it back where you found it. Tell yourself you're not superstitious. Tell yourself you're a reasonable person. Tell yourself names aren't switches. Then watch the light over your sink while you're saying all that and tell me it doesn't hum. Tell me it doesn't dim for a breath long enough for you to see the room become deeper, and then decide on its own to be bright again. I don't believe in vampires. I still don't, even after everything I'm about to tell you. What I believe in now is simpler and worse. How a story can wait in the cold ground for you, and how some sicknesses don't want cures, they want witnesses. This happened 3 falls ago in Jewett City, Connecticut. I was 28, drifting between freelance gigs, taking whatever work my friend Maya found me. She's a videographer in a little New England production house that sells short documentaries to YouTube channels. Haunted places, forgotten history, that kind of thing. When she called, her voice sounded excited and careful in the way it only gets when she thinks she found something big and unsafe. Small town, old cemetery, family vault, not clickbait, she said. People here still gasp when you say it out loud. What out loud? The vampire grave, she said. Pack warm clothes, it was mid-October. The leaves on I-395 were just starting to go from green to brittle sugar colors. Jewett City is not a city. It's a quiet place with a low river and church steeples and those old houses that look like they've been pushed back a few inches by every winter. I met Maya at a diner that had a mounted buckhead whose glass eyes always seemed pointed at the exit. She had already made friends with the server by asking about the town's pie hierarchy. Behind the counter, a radio whispered weather and missing dogs. "This is Evan," she said, nodding at the guy in the booth next to her. He reached out a hand. Late 30s, thin, the kind of guy who makes even a clean hoodie look like a uniform. Our sound guy. Also an EMT, which is nice if one of us face plants on a gravestone. I shook his hand. He felt warm and dry and tired. He had the calm look of someone who stood in too many living rooms that smelled like bleach. The server leaned over the coffee pot. "You folks from out of town?" She said it with that nicer-than-it-sounds suspicion you get in places where everybody knows the difference between uninvited and unexpected. "We're filming some local history," Maya said. "Do you know anything about the Ray family?" The server's face did a little involuntary twitch. It wasn't fear. It was irritation, like a splinter you can't get out. People always come around this time of year asking that, talking like we hunted vampires with pitchforks. It was an illness. What kind? I asked. "The kind that eats people slow," she said, but it was a long time ago. We had a schedule to stick to. Footage of the cemetery at civil twilight, interviews with the local historian, B-roll of the river and the mills. The usual. We found the cemetery with an old map and a man named Ephraim, who turned out to be the unofficial caretaker. He was in his 70s with a voice like a devoured cigar. He pointed with a rake down a row of headstones, each tilt telling the ground's own long story. "You want the Rays," he said. "You won't find much from the family itself. A bunch of markers, then the vault, then nothing. Time eats without a mouth." Maya filmed while I handled notes. Evan walked the perimeter holding a boom mic like a person checking for rain. The air smelled like wet pennies and maple leaves. A low fog had drifted in from the river and sat stubbornly between the stones. If you exhale slow in cold weather, you can watch your breath leave you. In that cemetery, it felt like the fog was the thing breathing, and we were just catching a ride. The vault was smaller than the word makes it sound. A brick rectangle rising knee-high from the ground, capped with a slab. No ornate angels, no cryptic Latin, just workmanlike New England masonry, the way a person might build a promise they don't expect to keep. The slab had a crack running through it that someone had tried to seal with a line of mortar, long dried into a pale vein. "Was this opened?" Maya asked, low as if a voice could carry down into stone. "Long time ago," Ephraim said. "Different owners, different names, different reasons to say the same words. Folks exhumed people for vampires, or, of course, they didn't mean big-toothed bats. They meant anyone who kept dying slow in the same house. Consumption, they called it. Tuberculosis. But people didn't know the word. They knew fear. But the heart, Maya said quietly. They burned a heart. He glanced at me. You told her the tourist version? She reads, I said. There's truth to it, he said. There's always a truth. The bones say some things. The town ledger says others. Maya filmed the crack. Evan stood with his headphones on, listening to the air. After a while, he said, Do you smell smoke? It wasn't wood smoke. It was something older, drier, like the scent you get when you open a box that's been in an attic since before you were born. It was faint enough that you could tell yourself you were imagining it, which we did because it's easier. It was probably just someone's fireplace miles away, a trick of air. We spent the afternoon as planned. The historian, Mrs. Calhoun, 80 of a day, met us in the public library and laid out the facts in a series of acid-free folders that made a hollow sound when you tapped them. She had the briskness of someone who loves people but loves paper more because paper doesn't argue. In the 1850s, she said, the Ray family kept getting sick, coughing blood, fever. One son died, then another, then a third who, if you read the clippings, died twice. There were whispers. There's always a man who knows something from the old country. So they dug them up, I said. They exhumed the family, she said, crisp and neutral. In some cases, the bodies had decayed as you would expect. In one case, not as much as people thought they should have. They removed the heart and burned it to stop the wasting. And then the next day, one of the men who tended the fire was found unwell. Unwell how? Evan asked. She looked at him with a librarian's reluctance to traffic in gossip. He was pale. He was cold. His lips were blue as if he had drowned. The doctor wrote that his lungs had ash in them. That was the story for 100 years. It goes on you, the story. It has a way of looking for a throat. What do you think? I asked. She pursed her mouth. I think people do strange things when they're afraid. And I think fear can be contagious. More contagious than any illness. We filmed her, then shot some B-roll of the old mill. Maya was good. She moved like a dancer when she worked, as if the camera were an extension of her own quiet curiosity. Evan got levels. I got quotes. By dark, we were back at the cemetery for night footage, because there's no rule that says you can't make money off your own goosebumps. Ephraim had said he'd swing by to lock the gate if we stayed late. We shot for an hour under a sky like damp felt. The fog climbed the stones, retreated, climbed again. In the viewfinder, the crack in the vault's cap looked like a line drawn in a shaking hand. The smell of old smoke came and went like a memory you don't trust. At some point, Evan took off his headphones and rubbed his ears. You hear that? He asked. I shook my head. Not a noise exactly, he said. Pressure. Like we're next to a highway you can't see. Maya changed lenses. If I make you list every pressure you felt at dead of night shoots, we'll be here all week. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. At 9, Ephraim's truck creaked up to the gate. He walked our way with a flashlight that looked older than his truck. Curfew, he announced, but softly. Graves are like ponds. They gather trouble at night. It wasn't until we were back at the motel that we realized Evan was coughing. Not much, a polite little cough. Enough to make him wave a hand and say, allergies. I fell asleep to the click of the room heater cycling on and off, thinking about the ledger and the smell of smoke. The next morning, the fog hadn't lifted. It was one of those white mornings where the world feels like a washed-out photograph. We had 2 interviews left, a local doctor who'd grown up hearing the vampire story, and a family whose yard abutted the cemetery and who had opinions. Evan said he'd meet us there. He wanted to run to the pharmacy for cough drops. We can pick them up, I said, but he shook his head. He looked a little gray. Every fall I get this, he said. If I drink enough water, my immune system remembers what to do. The doctor's office was a prefab building with posters of healthy lungs that looked like bad valentines. He gave us a smart, careful version of what we already knew. Tuberculosis had a long arc and a cruel one. It made people look possessed by something patient. He told us about how fat can render away after death, making a body look strangely preserved. Grave wax, he called it. How cold air slows decay, how fear speeds it up. If your ancestors saw their sons dying one by one, he said, they would try anything. If someone told them that the heart carries the hunger, they'd believe it. Our brains are storytelling machines. We see a pattern long before we see a pathogen. Is that all it was? I asked. He smiled. All seems like a big word. When we left, I checked my phone. 1 missed call from Evan. No message. I texted him where we were headed and when. and got a typing bubble that went away and didn't come back. Maya watched me not hide my worry. "He's a ghoster," she said, in the old-fashioned social way. "Let's swing by his room." He didn't answer the door. His truck was in the lot, beaded with fog. The manager was not enthusiastic about opening rooms for film people, but when I told him Evan was an EMT and might be sick, he found a master key whose metal had been worn smooth by panic. Evan was sitting on the side of his bed, bent forward like he was tying his shoes, just breathing. His skin had that strange dry shine of aluminum foil. His lips were a rim of bicycle brake blue. "Hey man," I said, too loudly. "You good?" He looked up slowly as if we were above water and he was below it and he had to travel to see us. "I'm fine," he said in the voice people use when they are not fine and they don't want you to ask the next question. Maya stepped closer, careful. "You sound like you swallowed a sandbox." He tried to laugh and coughed instead. It wasn't a big cough. It wasn't anything like the horror movie hacking you hear when someone's about to die. It was small, like the way a kid might cough to pretend they're not crying. He raised a hand to his mouth. When he pulled it away, his palm had a faint gray dusting. I told myself it was lint. "I think you should go to the ER, Maya said, and for the first time since I'd met her, there was no joke in her tone. "I'm okay," he said. He stood and swayed. His eyes tracked a little slow. "I think I just need air." We drove him. It was 3 minutes down the road, then a left past the diner where the buck watched everyone leave. The ER had that specific smell of warmed plastic and rubbed sanitizer. They took him back and told us to wait, and we did, listening to a television that was turned up too loud to hear and too quiet to watch. I called Ephraim because I couldn't think of who else to call. He didn't say, "I told you so," but only because he was kinder than people like me have any right to expect. 2 hours later, a resident in blue scrubs came out and told us they were running tests and asked if he had any exposures. We both said cemetery at the same time, then felt stupid. "Then we didn't. What were you doing there?" he asked with the flat face of someone trying not to judge. "Filming," I said, listening to the ground. "We're going to do a CT, he said. "There's a lot of particulate in his lungs." "Like what?" Maya asked. "Weird," he said before the "like what." "The texture is weird. It's probably nothing. People inhale all kinds of things." We sat. He came back an hour later and said they wanted to keep him overnight for observation. He did not say we were wrong to be afraid, which is maybe the one sentence that could have calmed me. Back at the motel, I lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling. The heater clicked on, off, on. The air had that smell again, faint and insistent. Old smoke, library dust after a fire. I realized my throat felt dry in a very specific place. Not the back where colds start, but the center line, where you swallow secrets. I got up too fast and the room lurched. There was a dull ache along my ribs like I'd been laughing too hard the night before. Maya was in the bathroom running the shower to steam the mirror so she could write notes on it. A weird ritual she does when she's anxious. When she came out, she had drawn a heart and crossed it out, then drawn a pair of lungs and circled them. "You ever feel like a story is trying to climb you?" she asked. "I feel like I can't get the smell off me," I said. She nodded. "They burned the heart," she said softly. "The man who lit the fire was found the next morning with his lungs full of ash." "That's the story," I said. "Wasn't that just folklore?" "Folklore always starts as first aid," she said. "Someone trying to stop the bleeding with whatever they've got." We did the stupid thing. We went back. It was after midnight. Ephraim's warning played in my head like a lighthouse. The fog was thicker, but it hugged the ground now like a low tide had exposed it. The gate wasn't locked. I don't know if it was supposed to be. The vault waited where we had left it, doing nothing, which somehow felt worse. Maya set up the camera. "We'll do 10 minutes of walk and talk, then 10 of static," she said, because she didn't know what else to do but work. I held the recorder. My hands shook from nothing and everything. "You sure we should be here?" I asked. "No," she said, "but I don't know how to sleep anywhere else right now." We started rolling. I did the intro because I have the voice that makes people think of bus tours and good news radio. I said my name and the date and the place. I said we were recording because something didn't feel right. Because our friend was in the hospital with something too old to be new and too new to be old. I said I didn't believe in vampires. "It's a family story," I said to the camera. "A family got sick and fear told them to dig. They burned a heart to stop a hunger. And the next morning a man who tended the fire couldn't breathe. Across the field a shape came out of the fog. I almost jumped, but it was just someone walking slowly with a flashlight that bounced with each step. Ephraim raised his free hand in apology. "I figured I'd find you two," he said. "Couldn't sleep. It hums some nights, this place. Hums." I asked. "Not sound," he said. Not like music. Like you get when you stand between two refrigerators. And attention." Maya turned the camera to him without asking. He didn't flinch. Some people are shy, but some people just don't see the point of hiding. "You know there's a pipe," he said, and his voice was almost a laugh. "A drain, they said a long time ago. Because water would collect down there. And water doesn't like to sit in graves. It takes things with it." "Where does it go?" Maya asked. He shrugged. "The ground, the hill, the river, if the river is still thirsty." He walked to the vault and squatted, knees popping, and ran his hand along the mortar seam. "We patched this more times than I can count. It always looks like a good job for a while." He tapped the cap with his knuckles, not a knock, a test. "This rock breathes," he said softly, almost to himself. "Ephraim," I said, and then stopped, because I didn't know what I was asking. "I know," he said. "He's at the hospital?" "The sound fella?" "Yeah," Maya said. "Particulate in his lungs." He nodded once. "You see dust in the right light," he said. "You wave your hand and it moves. But it's there whether you see it or not. The old stories always made it a mouth. But sometimes it's a fog. A dry fog. All it needs is a way in." He stood, and with a young man's suddenness, he pulled his old lighter from his pocket. It was one of those battered Zippos with a faded Marines emblem. He flicked it until it caught, then held the flame near the seam. "Sometimes you can pull it out," he said, half grin now, "the way you pull splinters with heat." "Don't," Maya said automatically. But she raised the camera. I don't know what I expected. I think I expected nothing. The flame licked the crack, which looked like all cracks, and then there was this small thing. A whisper of movement like the air exhaled. The flame bent toward the seam, just a hair. If you blinked, you missed it. But none of us blinked. Ephraim pulled the lighter back. He was no fool. We stood there listening, which is the dumbest and only thing you can do. The fog crept. The grass clicked with night insects. Somewhere far off, a dog barked twice and then decided against a third time. Then came the cough. Not from us. From inside, except you tell yourself that's the acoustics. A dry little cough like a carpenter clearing sawdust from his throat. The kind of sound a person makes when they've been polite for too long. "Okay," Maya said softly. "Okay, we got that. We got that." Her voice shook in a way I'd never heard. "Time to go," Ephraim said, very calm. He put the lighter in his pocket and patted the stone once like you might pat a horse that's thinking about kicking. We walked out together, because that's how you do it in places like that. Shoulder to shoulder, heads angled so you can see more than one direction at once. At the truck, I breathed in hard as if air were a choice. My throat scraped. When I turned, the fog around the vault looked thicker, but maybe that was just all the stories I'd ever heard choosing a place to stand. We didn't sleep, not in any real way. The next morning, the ER called. Evan was stable. They were giving him oxygen and steroids while they figured out what his lungs thought they were full of. The resident kept using the word particulate. He kept not saying ash. "Can you come in?" he asked us. "He's asking for you." In the very bright light of the very white room, Evan looked like someone had erased him and was doing their best to draw him back. He smiled when he saw us. It took too much from him. He pointed at his own chest, then did a little mime of brushing something away, then opened his hand to show emptiness. He did it again, slower, and this time I understood it doesn't brush off. It doesn't leave. "They think it's some kind of environmental exposure," the resident said. "He might have inhaled dust from the site. It's not unheard of. Old places have all sorts of things in them." "Like what?" Maya asked. He glanced at the door as if someone outside might tell him whether the next sentence was allowed. "Stuff you'd find in mummified tissue, in dried organics, in old insulation. You can breathe anything if you stand in the right spot." That afternoon, we went back to the library because I needed to put my hands on paper again. I asked Mrs. Calhoun about the man who lit the heart. She had it. Of course she did. A yellowed column, paragraphs tilted like wind-blown leaves. The man's name, his age. A line about how his wife woke to him shivering and shaking with breath like a house with the chimney stopped up. "What happened to him?" I asked. She adjusted her glasses. "He lived another month. Some days he felt like himself. Some days not. He died when the frost came and the ground went stiff. His wife said he died with his mouth open like he was trying to catch snow. I asked if anyone else had gotten sick the same way, right after. She hesitated. A boy, she said, 12, stole a cinder from the fire because he wanted to show his friends, held it too close to his face on the walk home. He grew up. He moved to Norwich. He coughed a lot. He told his daughter the cold hurt him in a way that made no sense. He lived to 71. Stories are stubborn. We left town 2 days later. We shipped the footage. We cut the piece. We sent it to a channel that replaced Maya's careful title card with a thumbnail of fangs. We got paid. Evan came home a week after that with an inhaler and a paper bag full of prescriptions and the kind of quiet you can't medicate. People always ask what the twist is in stories like mine. Here it is, there isn't one. There's a shape if you stand far enough back. Here's the shape. For months after Jewett City, I could smell that old smoke for a heartbeat when I woke up. Not every morning. Not enough to make a doctor's appointment. Just enough to make me think about what air is. Some evenings, alone in my apartment, I'd hear a cough through the wall. A polite little cough. I'd put my ear to the plaster and there would be nothing human on the other side. No neighbors, no TV, no pipes. It always stopped when I turned on the sink like water could drown it out. Evan went back to work. He doesn't talk much about the cemetery, which I respect and hate. Once over coffee, he told me he stays out of basements now. Air gets old down there, he said. I don't like to borrow it. Maya and I keep filming. We do mills and orphanages and abandoned asylums. We do places where people forgot they weren't supposed to be happy. Every now and then someone asks about the vampire story. They say it like a dare. I say this, in Jewett City a family kept getting sick. Fear makes people think in straight lines, so the town made a straight line into a circle. If something is eating us, we will burn what it eats with. They opened a vault. They dragged a heart into fire. The man who fed that fire woke up the next morning with his lungs tasting like a chimney. He died trying to breathe something clean. You can call it superstition. You can call it a pathogen, a fungus, a dust, a terrible luck. A doctor will give you a name for any shape of it you want. The part that matters is quieter. It's not even in the cemetery, not really. I learned this that winter standing on my fire escape watching my breath disappear. I realized I'd been pretending for months that what scared me was the idea of a body that didn't rot on schedule. That wasn't it. What scared me was how the sickness learned, how it waited where it had been burned. Not to be a ghost, not to be a story, but to be simple. Movement. It found the easiest door. We opened it for it because we wanted to see what was inside. I still don't believe in vampires. I believe in fog that remembers. I believe a grave can breathe without wanting to, and a town can carry a cough for 2 centuries. Last week I woke up at 3:13 a.m. There was a taste in the back of my throat like I'd been chewing matches. I went to the sink and drank until water banged back against the pipes. The window was open a slice. The street was quiet. Somewhere far away I heard the last dry leaves of a tree rubbing together in the wind, and for a second I thought it was a voice telling me it was almost gone. I closed the window. The house held its breath with me. I check the news sometimes for that town, expecting nothing, which is what I mostly find. But every so often there's a little thing. A notice about the cemetery gate, a fundraiser for new signage, a complaint about kids sneaking in and making videos. Last month there was a short line about a gentleman, 75, treated for inhalation injury after a brush pile flare-up. Stable condition. He was always very careful, the quote said, and nobody knows how he got such a face full of ash. I called Maya when I read it. She didn't pick up. I didn't leave a message. I set my phone down and watched the steam from my kettle coil, and for a second it looked like fog hugging the counter. Then it was only steam, and then it was only room temperature air, and then it was nothing at all. Here's the thing I don't put in the videos. The vault's crack was fully mortared when we left. I put my hand on it and felt it smooth and cool, like a forehead with a fever just about to break. But I still carried home a little smear of gray on the side of my finger. And when I washed my hands, the sink water went silted for a second longer than felt reasonable. I told myself it was dirt. I tell myself that still. It helps you to be practical, out in the world. If you go to Jewett City, the cemetery will be there. The vault will be there. The ground will be there doing what the ground does best, which is keeping secrets by letting them out slow. You can stand at the seam and you can tell yourself there's nothing inside but family and misfortune and the hard arithmetic of winter. Your breath will look like fog for a second and you can watch it leave you. If you smell an old smoke while you stand there, don't be dramatic. Don't run, just turn and go. Don't even brush at your clothes. Don't pat at your chest. Don't give it that door. Walk out shoulder to shoulder with whomever you brought. And when you get home, pour a glass of water and set it by the window and let it sit there until morning. That's not a cure. That's a superstition, but it will give your hands something to do. And if you wake the next day with a cough you don't recognize, just a little one, don't teach your body the rhythm of it. Don't make room for it. Sit very still in the quiet. Breathe as if you are not alone in your own lungs, and remember the man who lit a fire because everyone said it would help. He was probably a good man. He was probably kind. He did what fear told him was mercy. The next morning he learned a different story. I don't believe in vampires. I believe in the thing we burned. I believe it kept going. I believe it doesn't care what we call it. I believe it is older than the stories and younger than our throats. I believe it will always find work to do. I used to tell people I loved Savannah for the same reasons tourists do. The trees that lean like old men whispering secrets, the warm nights, the way everything smells faintly like flowers and wet stone. It feels like a place built for stories, but I don't say that anymore. Now when people ask, I change the subject. This happened 3 summers ago when I took a short-term gig with the city's Historic Preservation Office. I was 27, old enough to know better and still too young to listen to myself. The job was mostly grunt work: photograph headstones, log inscriptions, and make sure the older family plots hadn't sunk or cracked after the spring rains. I was assigned to a smaller cemetery south of Forsyth Park, a quiet block of iron fences and live oaks that never made it into the brochures. There were 4 of us on the team. Me, Darius, a grad student from Atlanta who cracked jokes whenever the air got too heavy. Mrs. Caldwell, our supervisor, all linen dresses and clipped answers who seemed mostly interested in whether we met our quotas. And Mr. Leland, the groundskeeper. He was the local, late 60s, maybe early 70s, with a voice like gravel and a way of looking at you that made you feel like he'd decided what kind of person you were before you said anything. He lived in a shotgun house around the corner and carried a battered ring of keys, the kind you only see in old movies. The first day he walked us through the rows, pointing out where trees had heaved the pathways and which fenced plots were easy to lean on, and would collapse if you did. He didn't say much until we reached the back corner, where the ground dipped toward a brick wall that had bowed under years of August heat. There was a little family enclosure there I hadn't noticed at first. 4 waist-high marble boxes fitted with lids like tables for ghosts. The back left one had chains across the lid, thick and rusted, wrapped through stone anchors set into the sides. The chains were sealed with blobs of melted wax, candle wax by the look of it, long runnels frozen into drips. "That one," Mr. Leland said, and then he didn't say anything else. Mrs. Caldwell cleared her throat. "Plot 47C," she told us like she was reading it off a list. "The O'Rourke family. 19th century. The city notes say it's sealed. You can photograph it from outside the enclosure. Don't climb in. We'll mark it complete at the end," I asked without thinking. "Why the chains?" Mr. Leland's jaw moved side to side, slow. "Back when folks believed promises could hold," Mrs. Caldwell gave him a look. "Urban legends aren't part of the survey. The chains are a stabilizing measure. Old marble cracks," but I kept glancing back at it. The wax looked old, yes, dust settled into the edges, but the shapes of it felt oddly intentional, like someone had kept reheating and adding to the seal every time it cooled. The air there was a little cooler, too. Maybe the shade. Maybe that's in my head. We spent the rest of the morning cataloging. By lunch, my shirt had stuck to my back and I had a new respect for wherever moss finds water in this city. I ate a sandwich on the curb while Darius told a story about a supposedly haunted dorm at his school. He made a show of it, complete with flashlight under the chin impressions using his phone screen. I let him talk, but my eyes kept drifting to the back corner. At some point I realized Mr. Leland was watching me. "You hear local kids call it the screaming coffin," he said, like an offhand remark. "They don't come light candles or drink out here. Not near that one." "Screaming?" Darius perked up. "Night it went in," Mr. Leland said. "So they say. Screams from sundown to sunup for 3 nights. Dogs wouldn't go near. On the 4th, the priest came back with chains. Mrs. Caldwell sighed. There's no evidence for that, she said, but softer than before. What's inside? I asked. That's not our business, she said. Mr. Leland turned his keys over in his hand. The metal clinked, small and bright. Then he said, sometimes the business isn't ours. It is us. That should have been the end of it. Work was work. But if there's a part of me I don't know how to shut off, it's the part that wants answers in places that have none to give. That evening, back in my apartment, the AC fought with the heat until the unit clicked off in a sulk, and I lay awake listening to the city murmur. A thunderstorm rolled somewhere far away. Around 2 in the morning, I swore I heard it, the faintest thud-thud like knuckles against wood. It was probably the upstairs neighbor, I told myself. Old houses carry sound like secrets. But I got up and checked my door anyway. I held my breath and counted. The tapping came again, so quiet I might have imagined it. The next day we went back. I avoided the back corner, determined to be practical, and then Darius said, let's knock off early and grab a beer. And Mrs. Caldwell said, no, and sent me to recheck inscriptions we'd missed in the back row. The air there felt heavier. You know how sometimes heat presses your head from both sides? Like your skull is ajar and someone's closing the lid? That. The chain lay quiet, the wax lumps dull with dust. A piece of Spanish moss had drifted down and stuck to one of the seals. A brown lizard darted over the lid and stopped like it had hit a line. It turned, tiny head cocked, and scuttled away like something about the stone bothered it. I took my photos and was about to leave when I saw the corner of something trapped between the base and the soil. A scrap of paper, dark with wet, right where the marble met the dirt. I know. I should have left it. But I crouched and slid my pocket knife along the gap and teased it out. The paper disintegrated in my fingers. More pulp than anything, but there was a moment where a line of ink showed itself. A tight, slanting script. I thought I made out the word promise. Then the rest came apart in my hand. A smear of color on a bright, hot day. That night I dreamed I was in the cemetery, standing in water, except it wasn't water. It was hot air so thick it moved like a tide. The chains on the marble box were tight and the wax was soft and shining, dripping over my hands. I had a candle I couldn't put down and both my hands were full. There was a voice underneath everything. A woman's voice, young and hoarse, repeating the same phrase until it turned to shape more than sound. I woke up tasting wax. My sheets were damp with sweat, and there was a smear on my pillow that looked like pollen. On the 3rd day, Mrs. Caldwell sent Darius with me to the archives to check burial records. The building smelled like paper and lemon cleaner. A fan turned lazily in the corner, rattling the blinds. The clerk on duty was an older woman with a thick braid pinned into a crown and a faint smile that never quite reached her eyes. You're welcome to look, she said, but most of our 19th century entries are incomplete. Hurricane took the basement windows in '97. We lost what we lost. We found a ledger under the O's, the pages thick with age and thumbed soft. There was an entry for O'Rourke, family plot, 4 names, dates I had to squint to read. One name was crossed out and written again, darker, Bridget O'Rourke, 1889. Beside it, in the notes column, a notation I couldn't make sense of at first because my brain wanted it to be anything else. Interred 6-3, complaint of sound 6-4, 6-6, seal. Affixed 6-7, I felt the tickle of heat behind my eyes that comes when your body wants to cry and your mind doesn't. Darius reached over my shoulder. Sound, he said, like maybe if he said it softly it would turn into something normal. He traced lower on the page. Under the note, a different hand had written smaller, promise kept. The ink there was different, blacker, like it had been written years later. We took a photo. The clerk looked at it, frowned, and said, I don't like that. She told us people used to bury bells in the old days with strings down into the casket in case someone woke up. Savannah's ground is generous, she said.
It settles and it gives back.
That's why we frown on digging. When we told Mrs. Caldwell, she went very quiet. That doesn't change our work, she said, but she didn't look at me while she said it. Later, I caught her on her phone near the gates. She saw me watching and turned away. On Friday morning, a city engineer showed up. Polo shirt, sunglasses, clipped tone. Flooding had undermined the back wall, he explained. A section of ground behind Plot 47C had sunk. They needed to inspect and stabilize. The sealed one has to come up, he said. like he was talking about a traffic cone. Mr. Leland said nothing. He stared at the chains and rolled the keys in his palm. After a long minute, he said, "You'll need a priest if you're taking those off." The engineer smiled with half his mouth. "We'll need a work order." Mrs. Caldwell rubbed the bridge of her nose. She looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before, like something in her had been carrying a weight for a long time. "We'll do it properly," she said. Properly, it turned out, meant a whole lot of improper feeling things. A small crowd formed on the sidewalk without meaning to. Neighbors, a couple of tourists, a pair of kids with bikes. They leaned against the fence. The air tasted like rain that never arrived. Cicadas droned until the sound turned into a blanket. A priest from the neighborhood parish came by, roped in by someone's call, and stood to the side with his hands folded, eyes half closed. It felt both theatrical and not theatrical enough. When the crew wheeled the cart into the O'Rourke plot, they hesitated. It was me that stepped into the enclosure first. I don't know why I did that. Maybe I wanted to prove I was practical, that I could be the person who filed their paperwork and slept at night. The marble lid was smooth and damp, the chains cold even in the heat. Up close, the wax looked older and newer all at once. There were layers to it, older grade sections under cleaner, brighter drips. It had been tended, and not that long ago. There was a keyhole in one of the iron hasps bracketing the chain. I didn't think anything of it until Mr. Leland reached me and handed me a key the size of my palm. "You said we didn't have keys," I whispered. "I said it was sealed," he said. "Sealed is a word. It can mean a lot." "You don't want this," I said, showing him the key. He shook his head. "I'll hold the chain." I slid the key in. It fit like a memory. The lock clicked with a sigh I felt in my wrists. The priest murmured something I didn't catch. The air changed, there's no other way to put it. Like the humidity itself leaned in closer. We unwound the chain. It left a faint rust print on my fingers. We had crowbars to lever the lid. 4 of us braced, feet slipping in the summer dust, and eased the marble up an inch, then 2. A smell drifted out, not rot exactly, but something sweet and wrong, like flowers left too long in water. The priest coughed. The 2 kids on the bikes went very still. When we slid the lid enough to see, I thought for a second that the darkness inside was a trick of the light, something to do with shade and depth. Then my eyes adjusted, and I saw the lid had a hairline crack running across the underside, a spidering line that looked like it had been forced from beneath. The interior wood, what remained of it, showed a dozen small crescents, gouges dug in with perfect spacing. I knew what had made them before I let myself know it. Nails, not metal. The ends blunted and split. The marks on the fragmented wood, dark, old, were in the shape of scrabbling human fingers. "Shut it," the priest said too fast. "Shut it now." "Wait," Mrs. Caldwell said, but her voice shook. Darius swallowed. His mouth was open just a little. He had stopped joking an hour ago, and I had never loved him more for it. "Look," he said, and pointed to the inside of the lid. Embedded in the wood there were a few broken bits of keratin like splinters. They were set deep. On the decayed cloth below, near where a face might have been, there were darker stains, small but soaking deep, and that was all we needed to understand. Nobody said blood, nobody had to. We closed it. The sound of the lid settling was soft, like a door in a dream. The murmuring stopped. Somewhere a truck backfired on a distant street, and I jumped like it was a gunshot. "Okay," the engineer said too loudly. "We've confirmed okay." He wiped his forehead with his sleeve and gestured for the lid to be secured. "We'll proceed with the stabilization Monday. For today, just secure it, reseal it," Mr. Leland said. "Why?" the engineer asked. "Because we promised," Mr. Leland said. "Someone did. And we're still standing under the same sky." No one argued. The chains went back. The wax, this is the part that still makes my stomach turn, had been brought by the parish priest in a little tin, like he'd always known. He lit a stub of a candle and dripped wax over the links and said words under his breath, and I thought, we are performing. We are people with a stage and an audience and props. And then another thought came, quiet as a hand sliding under mine. Or maybe we're keeping something asleep, we didn't go for beers. I went home and sat in my living room with the lights off. The tapping started around sunset. Tap, tap, tap. I told myself there were 100 explanations. Pipes, the building settling, a branch against the window. But it came from different places, the wall by the kitchen, then the floor under the couch, then the inside of the closet door. I pressed my ear to the wood. After a moment, I heard not sound but breath, an old kind of breathing that isn't lungs so much as patience. I stepped back fast enough to knock my elbow against the chair. I didn't sleep. At some point, the storm I'd been tasting all week finally broke and rain blew in sheets against the windows. The city took a deep drink. Around 3, the tapping stopped. I fell into a dream where I was carrying something heavy and warm in my arms. And every time I tried to set it down, it made a soft sound like surprise. We were due back at the cemetery Monday, but Mrs. Caldwell texted Sunday night, "Stay home. Work at archives." Another message 10 minutes later. The back wall collapsed in the storm. No entry until the engineer clears it. I went to the archives. The clerk with the braid greeted me with the same small smile and slid the ledger over without me asking. The ink hadn't changed, of course, but I checked anyway. "Promise kept," it still said. She watched my face. "Some promises are chains," she said. "Some are bridges." "Which is that one?" I asked. "Depends on which side you're on." I wandered after that. There's a coffee shop on Bull where the ceiling fans always look like they're going to detach and fly around the room. I sat under one and tried to make a list of normal explanations. That's what I do when I want to feel sane. The smell could be old glue in the stone reacting to heat. The nails could be animal marks from an older intrusion, rats or raccoons. The ledger could be a joke. The tapping could be in my head. My pen wouldn't write. The ink had bled into the paper like the page was damp. My fingers were sticky. When I rubbed them together, a small ball of wax rolled between them. When the cemetery reopened Wednesday, the back wall was a neat new line of brick, the ground scraped and smoothed. The O'Rourke plot was quiet. The chains looked exactly as they had the first day, which shouldn't have surprised me. Mrs. Caldwell stood with her clipboard and said we'd finish the section by Friday, and her voice had that flat, careful quality people get when they've decided they won't be haunted. I wanted to be like that. I wanted to be made of lists and reasonable explanations. It lasted until I saw the wax. This is the thing, it was new. Not all of it. Most was the same gray, hard buildup. But in the run near the second hasp, there was a smoother, clearer drip over the old, still faintly translucent in the heat. It had dust on it already, but not much. I touched it. The crust was thin. Underneath it was soft. I looked at Mr. Leland. His jaw moved like it had before, weighing and pressing. "Who came out here?" I asked. "Lots of people come out here," he said, not answering. And then, after a long pause, "Sometimes a promise isn't one thing somebody says. Sometimes it's many people saying the same thing over and over until the world believes them." "Who's Bridget?" I asked. I don't know why I used her name. Maybe it felt like the right thing to say it like she could hear me. "Girl who lived and died," he said. "And maybe lived after dying. Or didn't. Maybe the sound was wind. Maybe it was something else. You know, Savannahians. We like our stories tidy until we don't." That evening, as the sun sagged and mosquitoes began to appear out of nothing, a woman in her 80s came to the fence. She wore a blue dress and a hat with a pin in it, and moved like she'd taught this city how to walk. She watched me work for a while, and then she said, "You're the one who opened it." I didn't argue. She nodded like that confirmed something, then told me her name was Alma. "My grandmother brought me here when I was little," she said. She brought a candle. She said, "We owe the dead." Her eyes were a clear, stern gray. "We owed her because nobody listened quick enough the first time." "Did you hear it?" I asked. "When I was a girl?" She shook her head. "No, I wasn't born yet then. But some things you hear because someone you love did and they told you true." She pointed with her chin at the chains. "You put those back?" "We all did." "Good," she said. "Some folks think freeing things is always good. They forget you have to ask what you're letting loose and where it will go." I said something about storms and engineering, something that sounded to me like a weak apology. She considered me for a long moment. "I seen you walking," she said. "At night. Around the block. Like you were listening for the right house." I started and then stopped. I had walked one night without being able to tell myself why. I'd ended up circling my building twice, counting windows. It had felt like looking for a place to put something down. "Don't do that," she said, like she'd heard my thoughts out loud. "Don't go looking for a door when you're carrying something you don't understand." "What am I carrying?" She smiled without humor. "Regret," she said. "Yours or hers. Doesn't matter who it belonged to first." I went home early. I kept the television on, too loud. like it could drown out whatever was quieter. Around midnight, I turned it off and stood in the middle of my living room. The tapping started almost immediately, soft as breath. It came from the inside of my front door. I breathed with it. I counted 3 taps, then a pause, then 3 more. I lifted my hand toward the deadbolt. Something old in me, older than my name, wanted to open it and say, "Okay, all right. Come in and sit down. Tell me what you need me to do. Tell me how to keep my promise." I didn't. I slid down the door and sat on the floor and listened. Eventually, the tapping faded. I slept there and woke with a smear of dirt on my shirt and a strand of grayish moss stuck to my hair. I don't have a tree close enough for that to make sense. A week later, our team finished the survey. Mrs. Caldwell signed papers with neat, clean pen strokes and told us we'd done good work. Darius and I planned to finally get that beer, and then he got called back to school early for something and left me a voicemail full of apologies and one last joke that fell flat and made me miss him more. I bought a candle I didn't need and carried it home without knowing why. On my last day, I walked back to the cemetery once around sunset. The tourists were gone. The kids with bikes had moved on. Mr. Leland was locking the gate. He nodded at me and didn't ask why I was there. We stood and listened to the crickets and the highway far away. "I keep thinking," I said, "about how she screamed for 3 days and then stopped." He said nothing. "Do you think she stopped because the chains went on?" I asked. "Or because someone finally heard her? I keep trying to decide which version is kinder." He took a long time to answer. "Kindness comes in different shapes," he said. "Sometimes it's opening a door. Sometimes it's sitting outside one with somebody while they cry." Which did we do? He turned his keys in his hand until one long one flashed. "We did what we could," he said. I left after that. The city was its usual beautiful self for everyone else, and for me it was something I wore that didn't sit right on my shoulders. I thought the tapping would stop when I moved away that fall. It didn't, not entirely. Some nights it came from the walls. Some nights from the old chest at the end of my bed. Once, after I lost my temper at a friend and said something I shouldn't, it came from inside the mirror on my dresser. Always 3 taps, a pause, then 3 more. If I stood very still, I could almost taste the air shift, a thickness like summer heat. I saw Mrs. Caldwell at a conference the next year. We hugged and pretended we didn't both notice how quickly we let go. "They're stabilizing more of the wall," she said, like it was community news and not confession. "We try to keep everything in place." "That's good," I said. I didn't ask about the chains. I ran into Alma outside the grocery store once after that. She had the same pin in her hat. She looked at me for a long second and said, "You look like you've been sleeping by the door." "I don't anymore," I said. It wasn't true in a way she could have checked, but it felt like the right thing to say. She nodded. "Sometimes you have to choose which story you live in," she said. "The trick is to remember the story also lives in you. There isn't a tidy ending here. This isn't the part where I tell you the coffin was opened again and there was nothing inside, or that we found teeth marks where there shouldn't be, or that someone confessed to sneaking in at night to play tricks. It's not the part where the tapping stops. It hasn't. It's quiet sometimes and then it's not. It's found me in other apartments and hotel rooms, in an Airbnb in Asheville, in a friend's guest room in New Orleans where I stared at the ceiling fan praying it wouldn't shake loose. Sometimes, on the very worst nights, I dream I'm standing in the cemetery again and the air is thick and the wax is soft and the chain is heavy in my hands. In the dream, there's no crowd, no priest, no engineer.
It's just me and the lid and the tap 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 from inside that is barely a sound.
I put my mouth to the stone and say, "I hear you." And in the dream, the tapping stops. I don't know if that's relief. I don't know if that's a bargain. I wake up with the taste of marble on my tongue and the feeling that somebody somewhere has stopped holding their breath. If you go to Savannah, you won't find the place in a guidebook. You might pass it without knowing, but if you stand under a live oak long enough and let the heat press on you, you'll understand how the air keeps secrets the way moss keeps rain. You'll understand why someone once poured wax again and again and again over a chain until it looked like a promise. And if one night you hear tapping somewhere in your house and it comes in threes and pauses and then begins again, don't open any door. Don't go looking for which wall it is. Sit down on the floor, lean your head back and say quietly, "I hear you." Maybe that's a bridge. Maybe it's a chain. Maybe it's the only kindness left. All I know is this. Some places ask you to carry a little of what they couldn't bear. Savannah asked. I said yes without meaning to. And on some nights, heavy, humming, full of all the words nobody said fast enough, I still do. I'm not a writer. I work in IT at a small school district outside Eugene. If this reads clumsy, I'm sorry. I don't know how else to talk about what happened last fall in the Willamette National Forest, and why I'm still sleeping with the bathroom light on at 33 years old. We were 4 people that weekend. Me, Evan, my sister Lena, her boyfriend Marco, and our friend Jess from college. We weren't hardcore hikers or anything. We just wanted 2 quiet days in the woods before the rain set in for good. We picked a loop trail not far from Mackenzie Bridge because it promised light crowds and moderate difficulty. It was late September, cold mornings, warm afternoons, the kind of blue sky that makes the pines feel taller. I took the Friday off and met everybody at a diner off the highway. We loaded up on pancakes, traded dumb jokes, and drove to the trailhead. The first hour was just the sound of our boots and the wind moving through the trees. You could smell damp earth from a storm that passed a few nights earlier. There wasn't much wildlife, just a squirrel that chattered like it owned the place and a hawk we kept losing between the branches. We planned to reach a small backcountry site by sunset, camp there, then finish the loop the next morning. Halfway in, we ran into an older guy in a green jacket walking out. He had that ranger vibe, sturdy and watchful, but he wasn't in uniform. He warned us the weather might turn. Light drizzle, maybe fog. He said it like he was asking us if we were prepared without asking directly. We nodded. He stared a second longer than felt normal and added, "Stay to the marked trail. People don't mean to get lost. They just get curious. You know?" Then he walked on. There's a specific way pines sound when the wind drops to nothing and then comes back all at once, like a breath you can't hear until it returns. It started doing that soon after we left the man. Jess laughed about how he looked like a cryptid in an REI catalog. It broke the tension. We moved faster, partly to warm up, partly because of that feeling we were being watched, which we chalked up to being city-adjacent people in actual wilderness. Our campsite was a little clearing with a ring of stones and a half-collapsed log someone once used as a bench. The sun went down orange. We boiled water for instant meals and played cards. The fog the guy warned about rolled in with the darkness, not thick, more like the kind that smooths every edge until the trees look soft and close. We turned in early. The forest does that. It puts you on its clock whether you want it or not. I fell asleep to the wind, woke up around 2 to the same wind and a separate noise. Not a snap or a crunch. Footsteps that sounded like they were placing themselves carefully on wet pine needles. My first thought was deer. My second was that deer don't stop dead when you stop breathing. I lay there and listened. The steps circled, then came right up behind the tent, so close I expected a shadow to press against the nylon. It never did. There was just that slow, deliberate wait. Then the sound of someone exhaling. Not exactly human, not exactly anything. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, and then the wind took it. I waited 10 minutes, maybe more, then unzipped the tent and shined my headlamp into nothing. Fog, trees, the reflective snaps on Lena and Marco's tent like tiny eyes. In the morning, I didn't tell anyone, because I didn't want to be the reason we packed up early. We ate oatmeal and broke camp. The fog lingered a little longer than made sense with the sun out. By late morning, it began to burn off. The trail turned east and must have dropped us into a different pocket of woods because the light changed. Everything got brighter, thinner, like the trees had pulled back. The air smelled cleaner. It should have been reassuring, but it made my skin crawl. The silence turned glassy. About a mile later, we saw the first mirror. Calling it a mirror makes it sound like a bathroom fixture. It wasn't that. Imagine a piece of glass maybe 2 feet long and a foot wide, set into the ground at a tilt, catching light through the trees. It looked like someone laid a tile from a mirrored wall right into the dirt. The edges weren't sharp, someone had sanded or sealed them. There was no frame, no hardware. We circled it like you would a snake you're not sure is dead. Art installation, Marco said. He said it half joking, but his voice was careful. He put a boot lightly on the ground next to it, then took it back like the dirt might give way. "It's clean," Jess said. She crouched. No dust, no pine needles sticking to it. "Look." She pointed to a nearby log covered in pollen and grit. The mirror was clear, like it had just been wiped. I leaned over and saw my face, slightly darker from the trees above. Behind me, the forest reflected so sharply it felt like a doorway. Lena took a quick picture on her phone. "What if it's part of a memorial?" she said. "Like those roadside crosses, but artsy." I don't know why I did it. Maybe because I was still thinking about the footsteps and wanted to prove the forest was just a forest. But I touched the mirror. Flat palm, nervous kid at a science museum. It was warm. Not like sun-warmed rock, not like body heat on a car hood. A steady room temperature warmth, like a hand held a minute too long. I yanked my hand back and rubbed it on my jacket. "Let's keep moving," Marco said. "We can tell the ranger about it when we're out." We found the second mirror 20 yards later, then a third, each embedded at a different angle, a different size. Some were small, like coasters. Others were the length of my forearm. All clean, all warm. The trail bent and started down a slope. Through a break in the trees, we saw a hollow. The way sunlight fell into it made it feel almost staged, like a photograph with perfect composition. In the center, the ground was disturbed, darker, like dirt recently moved and tamped down. Shards of mirror glass ringed it. Not broken, but set just under the surface, the way brick lines a path. "I don't like this," Jess said quietly. She didn't cuss much. When she did, it was usually to cut tension. She didn't cuss then. She just said it like a fact she was handing us. "I don't like this at all." We came closer because that's what people in stories do, and because smart people in real life do it too, if we're honest. Curiosity is its own engine. The ring of mirrors made a clean edge around what was unmistakably a grave. The soil was darker and finer than the surrounding earth. There was a smell I can only describe as empty, not rot, not damp, just the absence of things growing. "Okay, we should go back," Lena said. This is beyond weird." Marco squinted and pointed to a side of the ring where a chunk of glass was slightly pried up, like someone had lifted it with a flat tool and let it fall. "Look," he said. "There's something under—" He stopped, and I realized I'd been staring into my reflection while he talked. I don't take selfies. I don't hang mirrors in my place. Seeing my face there, framed by forest and sunlight, made my skin crawl because something about it didn't match. I couldn't say what at first. Then I knew it wasn't how I looked. It was how I held myself. It was off by a half second, like a bad video call. My mouth moved a fraction after my brain told it to. My eyes blinked a beat late. "Do you see that?" I asked. Why is he face down?" Jess said. Her voice came from somewhere smaller, like a closet. We all snapped to where she was looking. There was an opening in the mirrors like a small door. Inside, about 4 feet down, was a body. Not a skeleton. Not fresh. A man in a faded flannel, his hair gray and matted. He was face down. No skin exposed except the back of his neck. No insects. I wanted to say he was a mannequin. He wasn't. He was heavy in the way things get when time sits on them. My brain tried to settle on details it could hold. The pattern of the flannel, green with a thin red line. A frayed cuff, the way the dirt made a clean pillow around his head like it was poured. Jess was right. The obvious wrongness wasn't the face-down part. It was that something was missing from the wrong side. Where his eyes would have been if he were face up, there were flat circles of nothing cut through. The back of the head looked intact. The idea that anything could be missing from the front while he lay on his stomach made me feel like my thoughts were sliding. A gust moved the trees. The mirrors didn't take dust. Pine needles blew and skipped over them like they were oiled. The glass didn't streak. It didn't catch anything. It showed the forest too bright, like it wanted to. Someone did this, Marco said, because he had to put it somewhere human. Like a cult thing. Lena took a step closer and stopped with a full-body flinch. "Stop," she said. "Don't touch anything. Don't even breathe on it. We're calling someone." We backed up. I made myself not look down at the mirrors as we stepped, afraid I'd see my mouth move again in that delayed way. We walked out of the hollow in careful, stupid silence, like quiet would make us invisible. When we reached the trail, the world didn't feel right. The air tasted metallic. That glassy silence thickened, and under it was that careful footstep sound again, behind us but not behind us. Behind our reflection of us, if that makes sense. We started moving fast. It wasn't a run. It was the kind of speed you use in a hospital hallway. Shadows shifted. You tell yourself trees are trees, but everything looked like a person a second before it became bark again. Twice, I thought I saw the old man from the morning 100 feet back, Not walking, just there, held between two trunks like a photograph. When I turned to check, there was only the trail and the feeling you get when a word sits on your tongue. We walked for an hour, maybe less, maybe more. The sun didn't seem to move. The light kept catching on surfaces that weren't there. I was afraid to look too closely in case they were. Tiny slivers, saucer-sized plates, full panels, mirrors embedded in roots, mirrors tucked between stones, all of them spotless in a forest that coated everything with grit. Every time my eyes flicked down, my reflection met me a half-beat behind. At some point, Jess stopped. She didn't stumble. She just wasn't at my shoulder anymore. We all felt it at once, the negative space of her. We turned around, and there she was, 10 feet back in the trail, staring at the trunk of a pine. It wasn't even an unusual tree. Just a big one with a seam in the bark like a healed wound. "Jess?" Lena said, too soft. Jess didn't answer. She reached up and touched the bark with 2 fingers like she was testing a stovetop. Then she pressed her palm against it. There was no mirror on that tree. I saw bark. I saw moss. I saw her hand flat on roughness. But Jess's reflection looked back from that spot. I know how that reads. I know how I sound. Her palm pressed a mirrored surface where none existed, and in it, I saw the 4 of us, just slightly off, like a rehearsal. The other Evan looked past Jess and smiled. Just a touch, just enough to show teeth, a polite wrong smile that didn't touch his eyes. My stomach folded. I grabbed Jess by the wrist and yanked her back. When her hand came off the tree, the reflection snapped to normal. Bark. Moss. No glint. Jess inhaled like she'd been holding her breath. She didn't ask what she'd been doing. She didn't ask what we'd seen. She started to cry without sound, and then we all started walking again. We didn't talk until we hit the creek. The map said it cut across the trail about 2 miles from the parking area. It looked like every Oregon creek. Clear water, slick rocks, a log with a half-broken stack of pebbles someone once balanced into a tower. The normalcy of it broke something in me. I laughed in that way you do when you're not actually amused. That's when the ranger stepped out from the trees. He wore the same green jacket as before. Same face that looked like it should have been carved out of the hillside. He didn't smile. "You stayed on the trail," he said. "Not a question." "We found something," Lena said. "We didn't touch it. We need to show you. Or you should get actual people. Law enforcement." "The mirrors," he said. Again, not a question. No one answered. I think we realized at the same time that the quiet around him wasn't regular forest quiet. It felt padded, like we were in a room lined with pillows that tried to keep sound from bouncing too far. "Don't go back," he said. "You won't like where it goes. That's the truth you need today." "We're not going back," Marco said. He raised his hands like we were at a traffic stop. "We just want to get out." The ranger looked at Jess. He looked at the bark smudge on her palm. Then he did something that should have made no difference to my life and did. He took a handkerchief from his pocket, unfolded it, and held it toward her. "Wipe," he said. "If you've got anything from there on you, let the water have it." Jess did as he said. She knelt and washed her hand in the creek like she was in church. The ranger waited, eyes on the water. When she stood, he folded the handkerchief back into his pocket like it was evidence. "People make places," he said. "Then the places remember them. Sometimes the remembering gets creative." He gestured with his chin toward the direction we'd come. "That ring's older than I am. Older than any of the men I knew who knew about it. They always tell it wrong in town. They say it's a cult. They say it's a trap. It's just a hole in the ground with ideas about itself. Don't give it yours." "What does that even mean?" I asked. I heard my voice and hated the way it shook. "We saw a body." He didn't blink. "You saw what was left of a decision. You didn't make it. Keep walking." We walked. He didn't follow. When I looked back, he wasn't there. I didn't want to think about whether he'd stepped quietly away, or if the forest had decided we'd had enough of him. The path got familiar again, The light softened into something that belonged to our side of the trees. We reached the trailhead in that blur walk you do when your legs move, because stopping would make the world catch up. The parking lot was half full. People laughed. A dog barked. For a second, the normal noise hurt my ears. We drove straight to the ranger station because pretending it didn't happen would have meant letting it spread in my head. 2 younger rangers were at the desk. When I tried to describe the location, the words felt thin. "Mirrors," I said. "Like glass, clean, a grave, a man in a flannel, face down." The woman behind the desk didn't smile or frown. She wrote notes. She asked for our names, our phone numbers. She asked us to wait. She went into a back room and came out with a man in a uniform old enough to have seen more than we would in twice our years. He listened to the summary like he'd heard it in other mouths. He asked for landmarks. He glanced at his partner and then at the clock like there was a schedule the forest sometimes kept. Finally, he said he'd send a team in the morning because the light was going. "In the morning?" Marco said, a little too loud. "There's a body there." "There's a lot of things there," the older ranger said, and it wasn't a correction. "Morning?" We slept at a motel because none of us wanted to be alone. I tried to talk myself out of what I'd seen. The brain does triage. It tries to close doors. I told myself we'd misread the grave. That grief and weirdness made us see warmth as a trick. That mirror is just a word we use when we don't know the right one. Around 3, I went to the bathroom and turned on the light. The mirror over the sink was cheap. You could see the glue smear where it met the wall. I didn't look into it right away. I checked the tile. I checked the towels. I checked the ceiling like something might be there that wasn't allowed to be called a stain. Then I made myself look. My reflection looked back like reflections do, perfect and boring. I felt stupid for bracing. I brushed my teeth. I rinsed. I spit. When I lifted my head, I caught it, the smile. It wasn't mine. It was small, polite, just enough to show teeth. It sat on my mouth like it had rights. The eyes didn't move, the cheeks didn't lift, just that wrong curve. I blinked, and it was gone. Maybe I imagined it. That's the thing, maybe. People use that word when they need the room around them to hold still. In the morning, the ranger station called Jess, then me. They had our numbers. They said they went to the coordinates we'd approximated. The team found disturbed ground. They found a ring of stones, no glass, no grave, no body. The wind had scoured things clean, they said. That's how the woman at the desk put it. Scoured. I don't know if she meant the weather or something that doesn't get a word. We tried to argue. Marco pulled up a photo on Lena's phone, the one she'd taken of the first mirror. It was gone. The gallery skipped from a picture of our breakfast to a picture of our boots at the creek, like the forest had reached into the timeline and pinched it shut. She swore she hadn't deleted anything. Jess checked her palm. The bark smudge had faded overnight, but if she closed her eyes and pressed her hand against anything flat, window, countertop, my car hood, she could feel a coolness that wasn't there. She didn't say that part at the station. Life tried to resume. That's the strange mercy of life. We went back to work. We pretended the air didn't feel different. I found myself avoiding reflections, store windows, the black glass of my monitor when it slept. Weeks later, I caught myself watching a YouTube video of trail cams in night vision. And when a deer turned its head, its reflection in a puddle smiled half a second late and my lungs forgot how. This is the part I haven't told anyone until now. It's small. It's nothing. It's how the wrong things get in. 2 weeks after the hike, I woke up to the sound of the wind, not in the trees. In my apartment, I live on the 2nd floor. The windows were closed. The wind moved anyway, a soft breath that traveled from the kitchen down the hallway and stopped at my bedroom door. There were footsteps with it, careful, placed, trying not to be a sound. I watched the gap under the door because I didn't want to see the knob turn. Nothing forced its way in. No shape pressed against the white. The footsteps stopped. I got out of bed and opened the door because doing that felt safer than waiting. The hallway was empty. The living room was empty. The light over the sink was on. I turned it off. The window over the sink should have shown the dark parking lot outside. It did, and it also showed me, standing in my kitchen with my shoulders hunched against a fear I decided doesn't deserve to be named. And even as I thought that, my reflection smiled, small, polite, practiced, and held it a second too long. I don't know what the grave is. I don't know who the man in the flannel was. I don't know how you take the eyes from someone who isn't facing you. I don't know why the glass never gathers dust, or why it was warm, or why Jess felt a mirror in bark that didn't have one. Maybe none of it matters. Maybe the point isn't the what. Maybe it's the attention. The old ranger said, "Don't give it yours." I write this knowing I am. Maybe that's what it wants. A way back into a room, a hand on a tree, a hotel mirror that learns your face. Or maybe it's nothing but a hole in the earth lined with shards. And we were the ones who made it dangerous by looking too long, by seeing ourselves too clearly from the wrong side. I moved my bathroom mirror last week. It's in the closet, face down like a sleeping animal. When I pass the closet, I hear the wind under the door and something that sounds like careful steps, like someone is trying not to wake me. The other night I pressed my ear to the wood and heard a breath on the other side, flat and steady, waiting for me to give it a reason. I won't go back to that trail. That's the part people will judge. Some will say I should, that I should drag police into those woods and stand with them until we find the hollow again. Maybe I would if I felt like we left it behind. But that's not how it feels. It feels like it came with us thin as a film on water. It feels like there are more mirrors than we remember. It feels like you don't have to be near a ring in the ground to see yourself smiling later than you should if you hike out there and the wind goes quiet all at once and then returns like a breath you forgot you were holding. Keep your eyes on the trail and your hands at your sides. If you see glass in the dirt, don't touch it. If you have to look, don't hold your own gaze. People don't mean to get lost. They just get curious, and if the forest ever shows you yourself, turn away before your reflection decides to greet you. Because once it does, it will remember you with a patience you don't have, and you won't be sure which side of the glass you're on when the footsteps stop just behind you.